How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
Just a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare,
From the director of Highlander.
Oh, okay.
Russell
the
Mulcahy
director
or
of
whatever.
Highlander,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
And yeah, because he also did The Shadow. Remember The Shadow?
Oh, God, yes.
Oh, it's on Tubi. Of course it's on Tubi.
Everything's on Tubi.
Leland Orser's in it.
Hey, there you go.
And David Cronenberg.
We'll have to-
David Cronenberg is in the cast as Father Russell, so he's a priest, I guess. David Cronenberg is a priest.
Stop drilling. You've struck oil. Like, this is, yeah.
All right, anyway, let's do this. Let's record.
All right.
We're recording right now.
Oh, we are.
Are we?
Oh, we are recording.
I just showed the guys this movie called Resurrection from 1999, the part where Christopher Lambert loses his son. And I probably want to steal this to put in our social media because it's just so funny.
God,
but
yes.
I feel bad because this guy, at Real Jack Eason, who posted it on Twitter, he later says in the thread, I have received several questions about how French man Christopher Lambert can be believable as an all-American dad. It is simple. Lambert's character is originally from New Orleans. He's Cajun. It is clarified in an earlier scene where he eats shrimp in a bar.
just like Jean-Claude Van Damme in Hard Target. It's close enough.
Oh my God. Anyway, well, hello and welcome to Cinema Shock. It's the podcast exploring the stories behind your favorite cult and genre films. We do all the research so that you don't have to. We're the guys telling you everything you need to know about your favorite movies and the people who made them, so that the next time you're caught up in a nerdy movie conversation, not only will you know what is going on, you might actually be the expert. I'm one of your hosts, Gary Horde.
And I'm your other host, Justin Bishop.
And I'm writer-comedian Mr. Tade Davis. Thank you for joining us in this putrid pizza parlor of a podcast amidst many health code violations for episode 3 in our series, David Fincher, Rules of the Game.
I feel like I came in really hot with that intro, and I just want to clarify, you need to wipe those shit-eating grins off your faces, because we're talking about a very downer movie today.
Yeah, no.
And more importantly
not
than
gonna be
that,
fun.
if you're eating shit and grinning, today's not your day anyway.
You should never do that.
Listen,
this is not going to be fun at all.
If you season anything well,
Ugh, gross. sounds like he's speaking from experience. Well, okay, so we spent the last 2 episodes discussing David Fincher's debut film Alien 3, a movie that David Fincher disowns to this day. But, as we mentioned, even in the compromised version of that film that made it to theaters, one can see themes and stylistic choices that will appear repeatedly throughout Fincher's career, beginning in earnest with his very next film. The film in question would end up being the director's true breakout film, one that solidified him as a director to watch out for, one whose skill and box office prowess would become undeniable. The film that we're talking about is, of course, David Fincher's Seven.
Do you like what you do for a living? These things you see?
You have to wear blinders sometimes. Most times.
Detective William Somerset is looking for a way out.
You're retiring. 6 more days and you're all the way gone.
So how long have you lived here?
Too long.
Detective David Mills is looking for a way in.
We'll be spending every waking hour together from now until the time I leave. I'll show you who your friends and enemies are.
Look, I've worked homicide 5 years. Out here.
Now,
Ladies and gentlemen, we have ourselves a homicide.
they're caught in a game.
No fingerprints and no witnesses of any kind.
Nope. About the only thing we know about that guy right now is he's totally insane.
Where the price of sin is death.
There are 7 deadly sins. Gluttony,
You're going to come take a look at this?
greed,
No one touches anything.
sloth, wrath, pride, lust, and envy. 7.
You can expect 5 more of these. This guy's methodical, exacting, and worst of all, patient.
He's laughing at us.
Brad Pitt, Morgan Freeman, Gwyneth Paltrow.
Have you ever seen anything like this? No.
7.
We appreciate you. We don't know how you found us, but imagine our surprise. We respect you, podcast listeners, more every day. We won't be adjusting our topics of discussion today, however, in light of spoilers. We just had to express our admiration. I feel like saying more, so we're going to ruin the surprise.
I know you're doing like a John Doe voice there, but it was real sexy. It was a lot sexier than the John Doe.
Listen.
That was like your sex phone line, your 900 number voice.
Listen, if you are going to murder somebody, you want to seduce them. You gotta make sure they're good and horny before you kill them, right? Just real quick, before we jump into a lot of the meaty stuff here, for any of the listeners playing the drinking game at home, every time we say 7, take a shot. But also,
7 shots.
Yeah. This episode marks our 3rd film featuring the talented Mark Boone Jr. So the first 2 being Sam Raimi's The Quick and the Dead and Chris Nolan's Batman Begins.
He's one of those fun little character actors that I like to see popping up. Most people probably know him as Bobby Elvis from Sons of Anarchy. If the name Mark Boone Jr. isn't ringing any bells, it's Bobby Elvis from Sons of Anarchy. So yeah, it's a great character actor, unrecognizable in Quick and the Dead compared to how you're used to seeing him. But
very true, very true.
In this one, he plays the skeezy FBI agent, who gets him the library.
Yeah, so it's Detective Flass from Batman Begins minus the beard.
Yeah. So the script for 7 was written by a first-time screenwriter named Andrew Kevin Walker. So in 1986, after finishing college, he moved from his home in the suburbs of Pennsylvania to New York City, hoping to break into screenwriting. To pay the bills, he ended up getting a job at Tower Records, selling music, while spending his free time working on several screenwriting projects, none of which ever really took off until 1991, when he began working on a spec script for 7. The script, he says, was inspired by his depressing time living in the city. Because remember, this is 1986 to 1991 is around the time that he's living in New York City, a time when New York was a pretty rough place. The crack epidemic was on the rise, and Times Square was an area that you just generally did not visit without being very careful. So for a kid who had a very suburban upbringing, and that's according to him, this was a major culture shock, which contributed to a lot of the tone of the script that he was writing.
Earlier, I guess it was summer of last year, Kat and I actually took our first trip to New York City, and we bounced around a little bit, but we did end up going to Times Square, and I still, I knew the Times Square of old was no longer a thing, but I think at some point the pendulum has definitely swung back really hard in the other direction, because now if you have any sort of slight ADD, or if you're easily overstimulated or anything like that, Times Square is not the place to go. It is just a sugar dump into your brain of
it's Disneyland,
of sensory overload. I literally at one point, Kat kind of had to shake my arm because my eyes were wide and I was just doing the constant spinning in one place, trying to get my bearings and trying to take it all in. She's like, "Are you kidding? We got to get out of here."
It's all
Were
pedestrian.
you pretending there was a camera circling you?
A little bit. You can't help but do that. It's just kind of am I standing in the place where Steve Rogers actually ran away from
I knew
S.H.I.E.L.D.?
you were about to say Steve Rogers. I was going to say, are you pretending to be Captain America when he first gets unfrozen? I knew that's where you were going.
Yeah, that's what I was picturing.
It wasn't my intention, but later after the fact, you're just oh yeah, I totally get it. I almost shit my pants standing there staring at it. It's just this is too much. We gotta go.
That would have really changed things for the first Captain America movie. If he had just hit his khakis.
The first time
Sam Jackson shows up, is we got to get you back, but you're not riding in my SUV.
So around this time in Hollywood, spec scripts were all the rage, and especially these high concept ones. Studios really wanted movies where a concise 1 or 2 sentence description could explain it because they knew that would make it an easy sell to audiences. So Andrew Kevin Walker, he came up with this simple but effective idea of a story about a serial killer who kills based on the 7 deadly sins.
In the Shane Black series, we talked about spec scripts a lot. We went into pretty big detail about that. That was like right before this and around this time. Mm-hmm. I think this year would have been the year that Seven was going on, all that stuff. It was like last Boy Scout time. And remember, like, I think that was around about the same time, like, you know, Shane Black and Joe Esterhaus were having battles for highest selling spec scripts, like 1.75 million, 3 million, and they just kept going up and up, and Hollywood was going crazy for those things.
Yeah, so while he was writing this script, he really wanted to do something different with it. He wanted to defy audience expectations and leave them feeling, in his words, violated and exhausted by the time the movie was over. This is a direct quote. There's lots of evil out there, and you're not always going to get the satisfaction of having any sort of understanding why that is. So for part of how he wanted to defy expectations, Walker had John Doe surrender himself to the police early on, robbing the audience and characters of the satisfactory ending that they'd usually expect from this type of police procedural. So usually this type of movie, one where, you know, the police are hunting a criminal, it's going to end with the capture of the criminal in the big finale. That's just how these things go. But instead, Walker had Doe turn himself in at the end of the second act. So not only do we not get the satisfaction of seeing the good guys win, but the audience has no idea what to expect for the remainder of the movie because there's no precedent for it. So in that final act, anything could happen.
It kind of reminds me of, you know, storytelling where if you really want to shock the audience and have them invested, like, you kill off a main character. There was a comic book series I was reading years ago. I want to say like maybe 8 to 10 issues in, they killed off one of the characters. It ended up creating this sense of like, oh, nobody's safe. And I think you see a lot of that in stuff like Walking Dead, where it's just like, you can lose a character at any time, and it just kind of re-solidifies the fact that the situation is dire.
Well, there's also a little movie by Alfred Hitchcock called Psycho where that happens as well. So it's been going on for quite a while.
You're the one who said there's no precedent for it.
Well, that's not a police procedural, though. That's a whole different thing. There's no precedent for if Norman Bates had turned himself in early on in that, then that would have been different. I'm not talking about.
Are we writing a new Psycho? Because that's gone so well before.
Hey, Psycho 3 is pretty good.
Okay.
Anyway, Walker's plan worked. He got the attention. This unique nature of his script got it recognized, and before long, an Italian company named Pentafilm bought an option on the script. And for his work, Walker received the minimum fee permitted by the Writers Guild, but that was enough to warrant him quitting his job, relocating from New York to Los Angeles, where he could dedicate himself to working on Seven.
He said, quote, "It was optioned at the Guild minimum, which was a fine living compared to Tower Records. It wasn't fuck you money, obviously, but it was enough to make the move from east to the west and get a Toyota, just not a Rolls." So he was stoked. You know, fun fact, how he got that script really out there in Hollywood was he is good buddies with David Koepp, who you remember we mentioned on Spider-Man.
And we will mention again before this David Fincher series is over, because he works on one of these movies that we're going to be talking about.
I thought it was kind of fascinating that a foreign production company kind of jumped on it first. I mean, looking at, well, Justin, you're a bigger fan than certainly I am. I won't speak for Gary about like Italian crime horror type stuff. Yeah. And, you know, talking about like how foreign countries do their standard fare of, you know, different genres. It's almost kind of a cliche of like, oh, Japanese horror movies are fucked up. Well, they are. But at the same time, like, I wonder what really attracted like an Italian company to this particular thing, because it seems very American, if I can say. I mean, they kept it vague, so I guess the city could be any city, the cops could be any cops, but like...
Well, it wasn't necessarily going to be filmed in Italy. I mean, it could have been like they were going to film it still in America with American actors and an American crew. I don't know anything about Pentafilm, so I can't really say. But I could definitely see somebody being attracted to the exploitation genre type aspects of that script. This script, as good as it is, and I think Andrew Kevin Walker's script here is pretty fantastic, it could definitely be turned into an exploitation movie under the right circumstances.
For sure.
That's not really the direction that they started going on with this one, because Pentafilm, when they started developing it, they hired a director named Jeremiah Chechik, who at the time had just released his first film, his feature film debut, which was a movie called National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. So not exactly an exploitation movie.
Although perfect double feature with Seven.
Yeah, if you're going to try to pretend like you didn't just picture Chevy Chase saying, "What's in the box?" Get the fuck out of here. But for real, Jeremiah Chechik, at that time, like, he had only done one movie, and it was the Christmas Vacation movie. Yeah. Before that, he had done 2 music videos. He did Van Halen's When It's Love, which, whatever, that's a certified banger. Yeah. And Hall & Oates' Downtown Life, which is also a song that exists.
Yeah, I don't know that one, and I love Hall & Oates, and I cannot picture what that song is.
But all that sounds weird, but I guess, then again, Fincher was a music video director too, so you got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Xenomorph or Chevy Chase.
Right.
You want a fun fact about that, by the way? I remember reading Chechik was actually himself in that movie a replacement, because John Hughes, who was the producer, was trying to give it to Chris Columbus. But unfortunately, Columbus hated Chevy Chase, and so they did not get along.
He was not the only one.
Wait a minute. Are you telling me that there's people out there who don't get along with Chevy Chase?
Yeah, it turns out he's not the best dude.
I'm telling you that Chris Columbus at the time was so broke he could barely get a meal and still backed out on Christmas Vacation because he did not like Chevy Chase.
Wow.
So they brought in Chechik. But a year later, Hughes was producing another movie and felt bad for Columbus, I guess, and was like, sorry about the other thing. Here's a job, and gave him the script for
Home Alone.
Yeah, which became the highest grossing comedy for like 30 years or 20 years or something. So, he's all right now.
I guess we should also note that although this was kind of one of the first things that really got Andrew Kevin Walker some attention, the first script that he wrote, and I believe it even sold before, like slightly before Seven, in about like 1987 or so, was a movie called Brain Scan. Do you remember this movie, Gary?
It does sound really familiar.
So it was a horror movie that came out in like the early 90s, or like 94, so right before this, and it stars Edward Furlong from Terminator 2.
Yes, I remember this.
Yeah,
as soon as the cover popped up here, I was like, oh yeah, I remember seeing it.
It was like a evil CD-ROM or something, but when Andrew Kevin Walker wrote it, he wrote it in 1987, so a CD-ROM wasn't really a thing. It was about a VHS tape, so kind of I'd be curious to read that script, because that makes me think of like The Ring or something, But I remember loving that movie as a kid, and I remember renting it from Netflix back in the day when you would get Netflix through the mail and revisiting it. It did not hold up to what 13-year-old me thought of it. It was not good. But that was actually Andrew Kevin Walker's first script, but it was extensively rewritten to be like an internet thing as opposed to the VHS thing that he had written. But Seven was still kind of his first big sell. But yeah, I really don't know why Penta thought Chechik would be the man to direct this script. I guess they saw something maybe in his music videos. I don't know. But for Chechik himself, he was looking to do something a little more serious for his next film. He didn't want to be stuck doing, family comedies. So they began working on this, and then Chechik and Pentafilm, they started working on the script and insisted on making several changes to it, including rewriting the ending to be less bleak than the one that Walker had originally penned. Now, Walker, he didn't want to change his ending, but he was basically given 2 choices. He could make the changes that they were requesting, or he could be replaced by another writer who would just make those changes anyway. And he wanted to get paid, so he figured, if my script's going to be rewritten one way or the other, I might as well do it. So he goes along with it, and he writes a more mainstream ending. In this new ending, Mills and Somerset confront John Doe in a burned-out church. Some sources say a church that's on fire, but either way, a burned-out church where Doe, who is embodying the sin of envy, kills Mills before being shot dead by Somerset, and then it cuts to a pregnant Tracy leaving the city.
And you know what's nuts? In that box that they had there, it was another box. And inside that box, another box. Turns out John Doe was just a prankster the whole time. He didn't even know about the other deaths that were happening. And when Brad Pitt goes back to his apartment, he finds that Paltrow is gone. He gets sad. He goes to his bedroom, and on his bed, the head of Jennifer Aniston. The killer was Paltrow the whole time. And there's a box there. And you know what's in that box? Girl Scout cookies.
There were so many dick in a box jokes that could have been made there, and you managed to not make any of them.
I did not think of dick in a box. That's so disappointing. I'm so bummed out about that now.
You know, I think the legacy of this film, I don't know that ending is less bleak, honestly. But in terms of the legacy of this film, you know, going off of what we were just talking about, it is kind of fun that now Gwyneth Paltrow has candles that smell like her box. So...
Woof.
Available for parties, bar mitzvahs, corporate events.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's still about the dick in the box thing. I just feel like if you can't stick the landing, then what's the point? But,
no, that's right. Listen, they're not all winners, guys. They're not all winners.
I'm sure that Tracy Mills would argue her getting to drive away from the city with her head is probably
less bleak
ending.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. That's true.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, but yeah, so it's still a bleak ending, but it's less bleak, and it's way more like Hollywood. You know?
Yeah, for sure.
And it wasn't like this was a simple one-time rewrite to come to this conclusion. According to Walker, he wrote a total of 13 drafts of this, trying to meet the studio's demands. And this whole development process went on for a while, so long, in fact, that they began to approach the point where Pentafilms' option on the script was due to expire. Because when you option a script, you don't just get to have it forever. You have a certain amount of time where if you don't do anything with it, the rights go back up, where somebody else can snatch it. So that's what's going on here. And just as this was happening, the company began to experience some financial difficulties. So they ended up selling the rights to the project to a producer named Arnold Kopelson, who'd recently produced Oliver Stone's Platoon. Kopelson brought the project to New Line Cinema. They come up a lot on this podcast, it turns out. So not long before all of this was going on, there was a movie you may have heard of, called Silence of the Lambs. Had taken Hollywood by storm. It was a critical and commercial success, and it brought home 5 Academy Awards, including one for Best Picture. So every studio in town wanted to replicate its success, naturally, and they were all looking for their own Silence of the Lambs. And then when they read Walker's script, New Line felt that they had found their own Silence of the Lambs, and they signed on to finance the project.
When was the last time you guys watched Silence of the Lambs? I think I watch it probably once or twice a year. I love that.
I watch it.
I was gonna say it's been pretty recent because I watch it. I've seen it a decent amount.
I probably watch it about once a year. It's one of my favorite movies, and it's one of my wife's favorite movies. So we revisit it. Yeah, I'd say once a year. I probably last watched it about 6 or 8 months ago, I would say.
Yeah. Did either of you guys happen to see the sequel series, Clarice?
Hannibal?
No.
Oh, I didn't see. Yeah. No, I didn't see Clarice.
Oh no, Clarice.
Honestly,
I started watching that, and it's on Paramount.
Good.
I think.
Yeah, it's on Paramount. Yeah, it's on. It kind of bummed me out that they didn't continue it because it was pretty good.
Yeah, I love all of that whole. I mean, I don't love every movie in the series, but
right.
I love the books. I love Manhunter, Michael Mann's take on it. I love Ridley Scott's Hannibal. So that it's clear that I don't fucking hate everything that Ridley Scott does. I do love Hannibal. I think Hannibal is great. And obviously my love for Alien is well documented on this show.
Yeah, I forgot.
I offended Justin when I said he hated all of Ridley Scott's stuff.
So once the project went to New Line, Chechik left. I don't know the circumstances of why he left. I don't know if New Line didn't want him or what. But one way or the other, once the project moved on to New Line, Chechik's out of the picture, which left the studio to hunt for another director. And directors such as Phil Janot and Guillermo del Toro were approached to replace him, but neither of them committed to the film. Again, I don't really know the circumstances behind that. I don't think at this time that Del Toro had made an American movie. I don't think Mimic had come out quite yet, so this would have maybe been his first. Regardless, the script then made its way to David Fincher.
Can you imagine Guillermo del Toro? Because I love that guy so much, but I cannot picture him doing this movie. He's not dark like that. I mean, he has dark elements. But he's not as nihilistic as this.
No, there's a little more whimsy to his stuff, even though his stuff is dark. And the thing is, like, this doesn't have any supernatural elements to it, which almost all of his movies do. The only one of his movies that doesn't have some sort of supernatural element to it is Nightmare Alley, and that's it. Everything else has something else, like monsters or something. So this does feel, on one hand, like visually, I could see him doing a great job with it, but also it doesn't quite seem to fit his sensibilities because it's a little too real, for lack of a better term.
I feel like a version of Seven directed by Guillermo del Toro would have, like, you know, in that opening crime scene where Somerset and Mills meet for the first time, Somerset is like, did the kid see it? I feel like the kid would be a prominent figure in the Guillermo del Toro.
Right, yeah.
And like Somerset would take the kid in or something, or maybe Mills and Tracy adopt the kid, and like now this kid is privy to this horrifying police investigation, and so we see
and then it'll turn out he's
eyes. Yeah,
and he'll have found a book in the library that's the 7 deadly sins. It's just like this huge weird looking book, and he just like reads through it. It's like a fairy tale about each sin.
That's like it's just covered in human skin. Like it's the Necronomicon. And then at the end, John Doe has tentacles. He's actually a like, Lovecraftian creature from beyond.
It's what Somerset says. Like his head splits open and he is revealed to be the devil. Yeah. That's Guillermo del Toro's Seven.
There we go.
And it's set in 1962.
Yeah.
After David Fincher's experience on Alien 3, he claimed that he would rather, quote, die of colon cancer than ever make another movie, end quote. But regardless, I mean, he was still on the lookout for a script in case something came along that he wanted to make a movie, but he also didn't want to make a movie. You know what I mean? So he was being sent scripts, but I think something really special would have needed to come along for him to want to go through that ordeal again. So his agent was sending him stuff, and he sent him, one of the scripts that he sent him was the script for Seven. And initially, Fincher was uninterested in it, thinking that it was just a standard police procedural, which is a prospect that he found kind of boring. But as he's going through the script, he continues to read it, and he was hooked by the killer's sense of purpose and captivated by the script's tension between surprise and inevitability. Speaking to Empire magazine in 1996, just after Seven was released, he explained, "I found myself getting more and more trapped in this kind of evil. And even though I felt uncomfortable about being there, I had to keep going."
Even though I felt uncomfortable about being there and I had to keep going is the title of Gary's mom's sex tape.
Wow.
I don't know why it surprises you. She's very clever with titles.
There was a lot about this script that appealed to Fincher. He loved the framework of it, for one, the concept of 7 murders and for 7 sins in 7 days. It's a framework that may have intimidated other directors, but the rigid boundaries of the story and the smaller scale were exactly what he was looking for after the enormity of Alien 3.
Yeah, if you think about it, it makes sense in a weird way, because think about Alien 3. And the thing I think about with Alien 3 is how there was a movie with absolutely zero structure at all.
Right,
Things were constantly changing.
Yeah.
He had to fight for scenes every single day. Now he's got like this very rigid, defined idea and a script that exists.
Yeah, that does help.
Starting out, this has to be a million times more appealing to the guy.
Yeah.
Looking at the plot with, you know, the 7 sins, 7 murders, 7 days, but they kind of, you know, in getting the information from the FBI, it gives him a leg up, and they end up surprising him at his apartment, surprising John Doe. And then he gives him the phone call of like, well, we're going to have to speed up the timeline due to setbacks. So how would it have played out had they not gone to the FBI? He kidnapped the one dude and held him captive for a year. And oddly, like, the lawyer and Sloth are the only two that are actually connected that we know of. Do you guys have any thoughts about how this would have played out plot-wise? I mean, obviously, you know, in a weird alternate reality of in this script's universe, but do you have any thoughts about, had they gone by the book, how would this story have played out?
I mean, probably it would have just ended with John Doe winning anyway. Yeah. just maybe on a different time frame, because they don't stop him.
Yeah.
Like them going through the FBI doesn't really do anything other than they know where this guy lives and they find evidence. But They don't solve anything.
Yeah.
They don't stop anything.
You're asking what would have happened with the story if like John Doe didn't basically turn himself in?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, I literally just pulled up the quote because I was like, oh, he says something about that. He was like, oh, really? What were you doing? Biding your time? Toying with me? Allowing 5 innocent people to die until you felt like springing your trap? Tell me, what was the indisputable evidence you were going to use on me right before I walked up to you and put my hands in the air?
Yeah. So Fincher also loved the script's bleak ending, but it turns out he was never supposed to see that ending because you see the script that made its way to Fincher's agent and the one that eventually made its way to Fincher was the original script with Walker's original ending, the one that ends with Tracy's head in a box.
My pitch was better.
Once Fincher expressed his interest in the film to New Line, they're like, oh shit. They like realized their mistake, and then they sent him the updated script where Tracy survives, but Fincher didn't want that one, and he insisted on the original ending. It was a major selling point for the project for him. So Fincher met with Michael DeLuca, who was New Line's president of production, and the two discussed the ending. And DeLuca actually agreed that the original ending was the better one. He's like, yeah, I think so too. Let's do that. So they had mutually decided that they'd begin filming as soon as possible. They're like, let's get this started within the next 6 weeks, because they were worried that any further delay might attract unwanted attention from the higher-ups at New Line, like Bob Shea might have gotten wind of it, which could lead to interference in their plan. Now, Copelson and the other New Line executives, they would continue to try to lighten the film's tone and its ending throughout the production of the film. You're going to hear us talk about this a lot because it was a major point of contention. But Fincher stood his ground, and DeLuca remained on the director's side. And then once the film began attracting the attention of well-known actors, some of whom were sold on the film at least partially because of its ending, things started to get a little bit easier.
Yeah, it's crazy to me that Seven would have ended any other way than it does right now. I feel like the ending is the reason that you know the movie so
we would
well.
not be talking about it, I don't think, honestly.
Basically, to backpack on what you were just saying, like Kevin Walker, he has an interview with the Hollywood Reporter where he talks about a lot of this, but he even describes that meeting that like Fincher met up with them and was like, yeah, I'm really interested in this movie. And they're like, oh yeah, we sent you the wrong draft. Oh, sorry. No, that's not the one we want. And he's like, oh, well, they were like, you needed this draft. And he looks at it as like, nah, that I would not be interested in that. Like very matter of factly. Yeah. I guess we'll maybe move away a little bit from Walker, but he says one of the quotes I liked in there where he talks about this. He says, as a writer, when you come on a project and you don't see eye to eye with the director, you have to make a choice whether or not you're going to stick around and rewrite stuff or perhaps feel like you're ruining your own material. That said, had I told Jeremiah Chechik during the process of rewriting Seven, you know what? I don't really agree with any of this. I'm not getting rid of stuff or changing the ending or setting it in a burnout church, head in the box, whatever. I quit. If I'd have done that, I wouldn't have been around for the happenstance, luck, fate, whatever, of Fincher receiving the wrong script. He might have gotten my script, but it would have been at least one, maybe several writers down the line, and he probably wouldn't have proceeded with those other writers. He talks about just like he felt like it was fate that he met Fincher and that at their very first meeting, like he was already kind of beat up by Hollywood and like Fincher was kind of beat up by Hollywood already. But they sat down and they're just like having dinner and he pulls out a notebook to start writing as Fincher starts talking to him about Seven. And Fincher's like, what are you doing? Put your notebook up. Like, we're here to talk. I'm not dictating stuff to you.
Nice.
And he's like, we've got everything. And those two guys, for what it's worth, I mean, they're going to end up working together for a long time. Like I read, like Walker ends up doing like, I think uncredited work on most of these, but he'll be on The Game, Fight Club, Girl Who Played Fire, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea when Fincher was attached to that, and all kinds of stuff. Like he just does uncredited stuff for Fincher all the time.
Yeah. He's become like a big script doctor, and a lot of that script doctoring work is on Fincher films. He sticks around on this movie, like he was on set throughout the entire shoot, I think, because Fincher wanted him there in case they needed to rewrite a scene or rework something based on the location and things like that. He had Andrew Kevin Walker there for the majority of the shoot, I believe.
Yeah, he seems to really respect that, and I think at the end of that interview, like he says something like every experience with him is the best experience you could hope for as a writer. Like even if it's something that never gets made that we've worked on, he's like, I always feel lucky to work with him. So
Nice.
Just a cool little thing about Fincher.
Oh, they're buddies. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, New Line offered roles in the film to several well-established stars before finding the actors who'd wind up filling these iconic roles. For example, Both Sylvester Stallone and Denzel Washington rejected the role of Mills before Brad Pitt came on board.
Yes, and through my little research, I actually was able to find one screen test here. I'm going to see if I can play this for you guys. Hang on one second. Okay, here we go. Hey, yo, I've been trying to figure something out in my head. I mean, I'm a little punchy, but, maybe you can help me out. When a person is, crazy as you clearly are, do you know that you're insane? I mean, you just, you're sitting around reading Guns and Ammo. I mean, I can't read, but, beating your meat in your own poop, and you just go, wow. Like, it is amazing how fucking crazy I am. Like, you guys.
What's in the box?
David, when can I expect a callback?
What's in the box?
That is an uncanny Denzel Washington impression.
It sounds just like him.
Denzel actually, in later interviews, Denzel Washington actually expressed regret on passing on this because the final product ended up being so damn good. He passed on it because he thought it was too dark, which it happened a lot on this movie. A lot of cast and crew, like people they were going after, just didn't want to work on this movie. Like, I think one of Fincher's costume designers that he had worked with on several music videos was offered this, and they're like, no, this is too gross, and like, I'm not going to do it. So that's something that just happened over and over. People were just passing on it because of the nature of the script. And Denzel is one of those. You can find interviews with him now where he's like, I should have probably done that movie because you've seen it, right? It's good.
Yeah.
I would have a hard time seeing Denzel as Mills as written, but they did do some rewriting once Brad Pitt came on board because they kind of wrote it more with his sensibilities in mind. The character may have been written a little bit differently had it been Denzel. You see, Brad Pitt had recently become a bankable movie star after the successes of Interview with the Vampire and Legends of the Fall. The runaway success of both of those films gave him a lot of negotiating power, and he was especially interested in Seven because he was worried about being cast as a romantic lead after Legends of the Fall. But David Fincher was a little unsure about Pitt because the actor didn't really fit the idea of the character that Fincher had in his head. But after he met him, after meeting with Pitt, he concluded that the dude was just charismatic as hell and likable enough that audiences would stay on his side regardless of his character's actions.
I totally get the thing with Pitt. I remember at that time, specifically, as a young man growing into film and my own, I loved Brad Pitt in Interview with the Vampire. I couldn't escape that. It was mostly because it was like the first time that I held hands with a girl, I think, when we were watching that movie.
Oh, congratulations.
Such an innocent time, yeah. I don't know where she is anymore. Not because of like anything related to Seven or,
because that was 35 years ago.
Right.
Does Jennifer
But
let you
all
hold
the
her
ladies,
hand?
you know what? I think we do hold hands from time to time. It's one of those things now I feel like you don't think about very much.
No,
And,
not when you've been married for years. It's
But back in the day, that was a big move.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if kids these days do that or if they just go straight to oral or what happens.
Oral? What are we, in kindergarten?
Oh, Jesus Christ.
This got really weird. Anyway, my point was going to be is that all the ladies at that time thought Brad Pitt was like the sexiest dude, especially from Legends of the Fall. And
Yeah, he was a heartthrob. And he had also just been in Thelma and Louise as well. Even though he's got a small role in it, like that was a big part of him becoming a star and becoming a heartthrob.
He was like Leo after him and Ryan Gosling after him. Those are all guys that I remember just being sexy dudes that had to they had to be pretty intentional about what they were doing next because if they wanted to be taken seriously, or they could just be the romantic comedy guy. What Zac Efron's kind of trying to do now too.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a good thing too. I cannot imagine anybody else in that role. Now,
no, it is iconic, absolutely. And when Pitt joined the film, he actually did so on the condition that the head in the box ending be kept intact. He loved the ending, and he fought for it. He had been kind of upset that the original ending to Legends of the Fall had been cut in response to negative test screenings, and he didn't want to see that situation repeated again here. And he also insisted that Mills be the one to kill John Doe as originally written, thinking that it was important that the character act out of emotional response rather than acting on morality.
I always read that about him on sets, that he's pretty straightforward and serious about his characters, and not like based on as much his ego as just being honest with what the character would do.
Right.
For instance, we don't have to get much into spoilers of like Legends of the Fall, mostly because I don't really remember. But I do know that it was originally like Tom Cruise who was in that movie, and he dropped out of it because he didn't agree with the character's like ethics or something like that. And Pitt was very much on board with doing the role, and more pissed that the studio altered it, like how it played out later, because how it ends didn't match up with how he felt that character's ending should have been. Anyway, which is a weird thing to think about Tom Cruise now that I think about it, because I don't know. He also played a murderous vampire.
Right.
A stinky asshole on board of the 4th of July. Not the character's fault, by the way, but you know.
Yeah. He deserved to kind of be an asshole, honestly. He had things to be angry about.
Right.
So for the second lead role of Somerset, the filmmakers reached out to actors like Robert Duvall, Gene Hackman, and Al Pacino, all of whom passed on the role as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually found another screen test. Let's see if I can pull this one up for you guys.
Wow. Where are Todd, you've got some sources.
Listen,
you really do.
You know,
he's amped up his research. I love it.
Listen, as a former police detective, I'd say I know where to find some stuff. Okay, all right.
Were you a detective?
I was a detective.
You were?
Yes.
I didn't know that. Wow. Shit.
Really?
I thought you were just a beat cop.
No. I was a private eye first, and then I was a detective for a little while. Yeah.
Well, I'll be goddamn.
Yeah. Okay, here's
Todd
this.
has like 30 jobs we didn't know about.
Yeah, my resume, it's I'm either an actor or a CIA operative. All right, I found this screen test. Let me see if I can share this with you guys. Hang on. I didn't say I was different or better. I'm not. Hell, I sympathize completely. Apathy is the solution. I mean, it's easier to lose yourself in drugs than it is to cope with life. It's easier to steal what you want than it is to earn it. It's easier to feed a child than it is to raise it. Hell, love costs. Takes effort and work. Hoo-ha. Fincher, are we married to the hoo-ha in this?
I'm really glad you threw a hoo-ha in there.
I was too. I was
waiting for it.
I think that sealed it. That was exactly what it needed.
Please subscribe on Patreon.
Well, as we know, the role eventually went to Morgan Freeman, which caused some concern from the studio, who were worried that pairing a black detective with a white one would make it seem derivative of Lethal Weapon. A stance that, quite frankly, makes me wonder if they had ever seen Lethal Weapon, which could not be more different than the script for Seven.
To be fair, Morgan Freeman is ready to retire because he's too old for this shit.
Right.
That is very true.
And Brad Pitt can dislocate his shoulder to escape a straitjacket. I think that's part two, though. I remember in Lethal Weapon 2, like he gets thrown overboard or something in a straitjacket, or something weird like that. But then, like earlier in the movie, he's at a bar and he's proving to somebody he could do it, like in a bar bet. So he dislocates his shoulder and gets out of a straitjacket. What are the chances that the same movie he demonstrates that skill in, he's put in that exact scenario later on?
That's that Chekhov's gun thing. That's that rule that you do, in screenwriting, where you if you show a gun in the first act, the gun has to be used in the third act. So that's what they're doing there. But it's a straitjacket, not a gun. I do kind of see. All jokes aside, I guess I see where they're coming from on that, because it's not just a black guy and a white guy. It's an older black guy who is your seasoned, detective, and then you've got this young hothead coming in who's the white guy. But that's honestly kind of where the similarities end, to be frank.
And we're really close. We're really close to Lethal Weapon too.
Yeah, this is Lethal Weapon's like 88, so this is like 5 or 6 years later.
Yeah, so like it would be on everybody's mind,
sure,
more so than it would be now.
Yeah.
It sounds stupid when I first saw it, and then the more I thought about it, I was like, okay, maybe.
Yeah, but the tone of the script and the tone of the movie are vastly different. Lethal Weapon's pretty apart. Yeah, Lethal Weapon's got some darkness at the beginning with Riggs and stuff, but it loosens up and it becomes a fun movie later on and kind of silly, and and by this time, hell, Lethal Weapon 2 might have even been out by this time, and things get sillier as that series goes on.
I guess I only am thinking that the studio who is making this judgment, they probably just get told a script is good and then they glance over it and then there's
they're
just
not
like
really reading
suit and tie. Yeah, just like kind
Some
of breezing
intern
through
read
it. It's
it.
like, sounds like Lethal Weapon. I don't know.
Yeah, black guy and a white guy. It's got to be like Lethal Weapon. Like,
Right.
oh, okay, yeah.
There was one person in the boardroom who was like, this is like another 48 hours.
Well, actresses who auditioned or were considered for the role of Tracy included Robin Wright. I think Robin Wright actually auditioned for it, and Christina Applegate, who turned it down. After Fincher had auditioned about 100 actresses for the part with no luck, Brad Pitt actually suggested Gwyneth Paltrow for the role, having been impressed with her audition for Legends of the Fall.
He liked her audition. Okay.
Well, Fincher liked Paltrow for the part as well, but the studio didn't think that she would go for it because the role was, it's relatively small and kind of a far cry from the kind of work that she had done in the past. So Fincher continued auditioning actresses until Pitt contacted Paltrow and set up a meeting between her and David Fincher.
Another way you hear this story, and it actually kind of lines up with that, because it was probably more that the studio didn't think that she'd want to do it, that she wasn't interested. Because I read somewhere one of them talking about Fincher wanted her, she didn't want it, and he asked Pitt to get her on board because they were dating at this time. That's where my joke is coming from, or they started dating right around this time, or a little bit after.
I couldn't figure out the timeline on that, and if they, because I read that they started dating in 1995, which is when the movie comes out. So I was wondering if they actually started dating as a result of working together on the movie, or if it had already happened, because they were engaged for a while too. They were together for quite a long time, but I couldn't figure out the timeline on that, if they were already dating or if they like started dating while making the movie.
It's weird when you Google it, because I did the same thing, and I saw some places that were like, oh, they dated from like 91 to some late 90s thing, and then there was one that was like 95, or it's not. I get the impression that they probably started, and if I'm looking at my educated guess, considering what Brad Pitt does, I'm not, I don't want to call him out or anything, but then he goes from Paltrow to Aniston later, and then Aniston to Angelina Jolie when they're doing Mr. and Mrs. Smith. So,
Guy's got good taste.
Yeah, he's got great taste, and he also loves his co-stars, I guess.
Co-star,
I don't know.
Yeah. Before we move on, I do want to talk a little bit about Tracy here for a minute, Gwyneth Paltrow's character, and how the movie kind of uses her character. Because despite having pretty limited screen time, Tracy really kind of becomes almost the emotional heart of the film. She is, after all, the catalyst for the ending, and if her character didn't work in the small amount of time that we see her, the ending would not have been as powerful as it is. But when I was doing my research on this, some of the takes that I saw on Seven accused David Fincher of misogyny in kind of the way that Tracy is used, not to mention his use of women in some of his other films. It's something you'll see come up a lot in regards to Martha Singer in Fight Club. And there's a lot of discourse regarding that when around the time that like Gone Girl came out as well. But some of the people who accuse Fincher of this use Tracy as an example because they say that her character really only exists to be a victim, as if she has no other role in the film except to die. And I personally don't really agree with that, but I did want to bring it up because, since other people are talking about it. What do you guys think? What do you think about the way that the character is used in the film?
I don't agree with that at all. I mean, I guess I can see where some people are coming from with that.
Yeah.
But I think she's like the heart of the movie.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. Like, she's the good. Like,
yeah.
She's the only thing grounding someone like Brad Pitt's character. And
yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. I mean, that's exactly
and
what
then
I
it's
think.
like the side of it with Morgan Freeman would be, his character is, I feel like on the verge of kind of thinking the world's dark and useless at the end.
You're right.
Too, or at the beginning of the movie, as he's ready to just get the hell out of everything and move out to the suburbs and just be alone. But I feel like seeing her and caring about her and her kindness and that sort of thing, like, kind of makes him like a more hopeful person through the movie.
Yeah.
And so, no, I think she has like a pretty big role in the story. Sure, she has to die at the end. And that's the nihilistic part. I guess you could argue there whether or not that's the right choice, which some people did. But no, I don't think she's just there to be beat up on and die or anything.
Yeah, just because she doesn't have a lot of screen time doesn't mean that's her only purpose. I think that the way that she's written, I think she does serve a higher purpose. Like you said, she is kind of the emotional center of the film. She's the one that kind of grounds I think that's the word you use, grounds, Mills and Somerset to an extent.
It makes me think of the character of Alexandra DeWitt from Green Lantern back in, actually pretty close to this, around early 1994. The character of Kyle Rayner, who's Green Lantern at the time, had a girlfriend, Alexandra DeWitt, and he comes home to their apartment and finds her dead in the refrigerator. And a lot of people, got up in arms that this female character had been killed, essentially the exact same thing. Like, her death was meant to serve, the main character's plot and all that stuff. And I'm there were a lot of people who were very outspoken about that sort of thing, but at the same time, like, the comic's called Green Lantern, not Alexander DeWitt. Like,
yeah.
And I mean, at the same time, this is a story about two cops. Like, the villain's motivations at the end, like, he admires Mills, and it's about these two cops and their ideologies kind of butting heads. So part of Mills's psychological, spiritual, physical makeup is the presence of a very sweet, loving, hopeful wife, which kind of, helps keep him tethered to the good side or the light, or however you want to describe that. But yeah, and we get to see in almost quite literally the blink of an eye, when he realizes she's gone, they get that little flash of her face, just enough for him to for that to seal the deal of like, okay, yeah, you gotta die. Like, and he's been responding emotionally like the entire time. So it reaches a crucial point, and without the death of Tracy, I don't know that we get there, honestly.
Yeah, I was about to say that exact same thing. Is your sympathy for her is the only thing that grounds the viewer, I think, at the end, or makes you care about the ending of the movie.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And I think it's telling that little subliminal moment that you're talking about, Todd.
Yeah.
A lot of people think that that's like a blink of her head in the box, and it's not. No. If you pause that, it's a memory of her that he's having.
Yeah.
That's what you're actually seeing. I think that Tracy is a vital element in what makes the film work and makes that ending work, just like you just said. And I actually think that casting Paltrow is a great choice, because she has this angelic quality to her that kind of draws the viewer to her immediately. Like, the first time you meet her, you like her.
If we were talking alternate casting, like, I like Robin Wright for this, but there is a more angelic quality, like a more cherub sweetness to Paltrow.
Sweet is the word I would use.
Yeah,
I agree.
She's so, like, she's an attractive lady, but she's not like movie star, like, she's girl next door attractive.
I was about to
ways.
say,
like,
she's very girl next door. Yeah.
And I actually think that the way that the movie utilizes her is great. Like, throughout the script, Andrew Kevin Walker is kind of subverting the tropes of the detective and thriller genres. We've already talked about that. And he's actually using the genre's history of being generally dismissive of female characters against the audience. Because in this, the way he uses, yes, she's not in it a lot, but she's used very powerfully when she is there, because she does help to humanize Mills. And then she disappears from the movie for a pretty long period of time, although the script does wisely keep mentioning her in passing, like when they're walking through the police station and someone's like, "Hey, Mills, your wife called, get yourself an answering machine," or something like that. Like, we haven't seen her on screen at all in a while at that point, but the script like brings her name up here and there just in passing to kind of remind you that she's still out there. And the last time that you see her on screen is when he comes home and he kind of cuddles up next to her in bed, after he's had a rough day chasing John Doe. And then she's not in the movie until she shows up as one last unseen piece of John Doe's plan at the end, and it just makes it that much more powerful, I think.
Yeah, I wanted to be clear too that when I'm talking about her having the girl next door attractiveness, I'm not just also judging her by her attractiveness. I just mean she's not just there to be a pretty person.
Right.
Gwyneth Paltrow is very good at being the same thing with like in Pepper and Iron Man. Like, Gwyneth Paltrow just makes a really instantly likable person.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
so like you just can't help feeling for her in every role. Like, she's just automatically, you're down for her. She's always great. And you want her to do well.
Yeah, it'd be hard to cast her as a villain in a movie, because the audiences would have a hard time believing that. You know what I mean? Because she is just inherently likable. So then we have the pivotal role of John Doe. Fincher's first choice for the role was Ned Beatty, believe it or not. He and Andrew Walker, they thought that Ned Beatty resembled the 1969 composite sketch of the Zodiac Killer, which I've looked at that composite sketch and I don't see it, but they both thought that he looked like that. Yeah. And by the way, that I know that's a funny little reference because obviously we know that David Fincher's going to direct Zodiac down the line, but one thing we didn't mention...
We know that David Fincher was the Zodiac Killer.
David Fincher was the Zodiac. No,
I thought that's where that sentence was going.
No, David Fincher, when he was growing up in California, the neighborhood that he lived in, remember when he was like neighbors with George Lucas, that was the area and the time when the Zodiac Killer was killing people. Like they had to have, when he was a kid, they had to have like police escorts home from school for a while because the Zodiac Killer was out there. So like, I'm sure we'll talk about that more when we get to the Zodiac episode, but that's not just a random thing that he pulled out of his ass. Like that was a true fear of his when he was a kid. So like him immediately thinking this is a movie about a serial killer, I'm going to reference Zodiac. That came from a very real place of his childhood. So anyway, Ned Beatty, they thought looked like the Zodiac Killer. So they immediately went after him for the role, but Ned Beatty passed on the role, calling the script the most evil thing I've ever read. And this is coming from the guy who was in Deliverance.
Let's go ahead.
I don't know. Ringing
put that quote
endorsement
on
as far
the
as I
poster.
know.
Jeez.
Right, yeah. And so they began considering other actors for the role. One person considered was Michael Stipe, the lead singer of R.E.M., which is super weird to me, but I don't know. He can. I've seen him act in The Adventures of Pete and Pete. Yeah. But not much else. But he wasn't able to do it because the band's touring schedule conflicted with the planned shooting date. So he was.
I think
out.
He looks more like the Zodiac Killer, honestly.
Yeah, well, I mean, he looks like he could be a serial killer.
Yeah,
that's what I mean. Yeah. No. I mean, I love Michael Stipe. I love R.E.M. So nothing against him. But yeah, with a shaved head and he's skinny and I get it. Yeah. Val Kilmer was also offered the role, but he turned it down. R. Lee Ermey auditioned for the part, but Fincher found him to be too unsympathetic, which is not surprising because it's R. Lee Ermey. Yeah. He did, however, he of course does end up being cast in the film as Mills and Somerset's superior, who I don't think has a name. I think he's just like credited as police chief.
I visited your home this morning after you'd left. I tried to play husband. I tried to taste life of a simple man. It didn't work out though, did it, maggot? So I took a souvenir. Her pretty head.
He just yells like a drill sergeant the entire movie. So Brad Pitt was pretty keen on getting Kevin Spacey in this role, but the studio initially refused to pay Spacey's asking price. And then later, after filming had commenced, those scenes were actually filmed using an unknown actor in the role, but the filmmaker, I don't know who it was, couldn't find that anywhere, but the filmmakers quickly decided to replace him, and Pitt helped to negotiate Spacey's involvement. Now, notably, Kevin Spacey's name does not appear anywhere in the opening credits or in the film's marketing material at all, and this was actually Spacey's idea because he felt that it made more sense to keep the killer's identity a secret. At this point in his career, he'd already done Swimming with Sharks, The Usual Suspects, and Outbreak, so he was becoming, fairly well known, and he figured that if he was the third billed actor in a movie where the top two billed actors are trying to find somebody, and they don't find that somebody until the last reel, it was going to be pretty obvious who that somebody was.
Yeah, Spacey, he gets it back at the end. I think he's like in the closing credits twice, like his as the credits are starting, he's all.
I think he's the first credit when it goes to black. I think is Kevin Spacey as John Doe. Yeah.
Also, apparently, his idea to shave John Doe's head. He pitched it to Fincher, and Fincher said, "Yeah, if you'll do it, I'll do it." And then both of them were bald for the production. So, and it also helped his fame, so he gets that. And also clever of him that since he was a secret, he didn't have to do publicity tour. He didn't have to do any
maybe
promotion.
That was an ulterior motive. That's the word I'm looking for. Maybe that was his ulterior motive in that he didn't want to have to do any press for it.
He didn't have to do anything. And, but great choice. Kevin Spacey's amazing in it. Luckily, he's a wholesome individual.
Luckily, nothing.
Always love and respect.
Yeah, his legacy has not been sullied in any way whatsoever since this movie came out. So,
There's that article, Justin, you sent me that article about from Entertainment Weekly about the folks that actually, kind of the focal point of this, outside of obviously the relationship between Mills and Somerset, are the dead bodies. And I thought this was really interesting. So here now is my research on the 7 dearly departed of SE7EN. That's actually how you pronounce.
Oh, is it? I've been saying it wrong this whole time.
Yeah. If you could get your shit together, that'd be great. So no, the first body isn't actually a victim of John Doe, but in an effort to be thorough, I thought we should mention it's the writer of the film, Andy Walker. He doesn't have many acting credits, but we will see him again on screen before this series is done. So the second,
he's the guy at the first murder scene.
At the very first murder scene, yeah, the dead body laying there on the floor.
I remember reading an interview with him where he mentioned that, and he said that he had a panic attack during that scene because he was so worried about staying still because he's a dead body, that he had a panic attack because he was worried that he would move and just ruin the whole scene.
Yeah, ruin the shot, yeah. Although, to be fair, dead body, cake acting role.
Yeah, unless you get an itch or something.
Unless you get an itch. So the second body, Gluttony, is played by Bob Mack. In 1984, he was the co-writer of a song called Be Somebody. I don't know if either of you guys have heard this song.
Can't say that I have.
It's the main theme of Mr. T's Be Somebody or Be Somebody's Fool. If you guys decide to lay this track underneath some of the dialogue, Todd A. Davis, Gary Horn, Justin Bishop, and Cinema Shock are not responsible for what you do if you get this song stuck in your head, okay? So throughout, he actually alluded that he was nude in the autopsy scene. However, FilmSchoolRejects.com noted in their recap of the commentary that a fiberglass model was used. And given the use of the budget and knowing how badly we want to be in movies, I'll let you draw your own conclusions as to what actually happened on set.
Well, they did use a fiberglass body for that scene. Because that fiberglass body was created by none other than legendary makeup effects artist Rob Bottin. Rob Bottin, if you don't know him, I mean, he worked on Joe Dante's The Howling, John Carpenter's The Thing. He is a legend in the effects field. And he did create the dead body for the autopsy scene. And he also created the prosthetics that Bob Mack wore in his one scene, the scene where he's in the apartment. It's funny though, we're talking about these corpses, and until we started working on this episode, I always assumed that dead body, who is, I think he's credited as Fat Boy in the credits, which is unkind. But I always assumed that was just a fake body that was created by the effects department and not a real actor, because he's just laying there with his face in a bowl of spaghetti or something, right? So, but they did actually use a real actor, Bob Mack, and but they did add prosthetics to him because he's been dead for a while, so they had to make him look like he'd been dead for a while. So,
perhaps I could add some clarity to this a little bit. Is the real guy at the table? It's a fiberglass dummy on the autopsy table.
Right.
He probably says that was him on the autopsy table, because one interesting part about that is Fincher felt so bad for him that he had to wear all those prosthetics, he said, for like 10 hours at a time when he was shooting, that he got with Bottin and they made sure he was very well endowed to compensate him on the fiberglass dummy so that he had a very large and shapely penis.
Right.
And so
good job.
So he's probably like, and that was me nude on the autopsy table.
Yeah, you see that guy? You see that dead guy with the huge dick? That's me.
Yeah, they said he came in at like 480 pounds, but like the camera adds 300 pounds. I imagine most of it is in his penis.
So, but Rob Bottin did all of the prosthetic effects work on this film, including, which is mostly done on the corpses. And when he was working on this particular one to nail the look, he researched crime scene photos. He observed an autopsy, because he wanted to get the design as accurate as possible and make it look like this guy's been laying there dead for a while. And Bob Mack spent upwards of 10 hours a day just having the makeup and prosthetics applied before the shooting ever began.
So the third body, Eli Gould, or Greed, is played by New York-based character actor Gene Borkin. Borkin has credits extending all the way back to 1972, but in 1991, he popped up in Silence of the Lambs and The Last Boy Scout, which we covered in our Shane Black series. Demi actually had him back to play a bailiff in Philadelphia in 1993 with Tom Hanks and Denzel Washington. But it's kind of serendipitous that Borkin played Greed because when he found out what the role entailed, he negotiated a raise on the spot and actually received 5 times the SAG daily rate, which was $522 at the time. So that put him a little over $2,100 to basically lay around in silk underwear and have some pictures taken of him.
That's like $2,500.
Yeah.
Good for him.
Yeah.
Good for you, Mr. Borkin.
Yeah, he lived up to it. I think he says like he wasn't originally, like when he answered the casting call, it was for a seedy lawyer. That was it. That's all they got. And so when he got to set and realized like what he was about to have to do, and they wanted him completely naked, I guess, and he was like, I'm not stripping unless you do. To Fincher. They said they gave him a pair of silk boxers.
And after SE7EN, he was Roy in Bound, which we covered in our Wachowski series.
Nice.
Yeah. So the fourth body, which technically is the first victim, is Theodore Allen, or Victor Sloth. Is played by Michael Reed McKay. Now, his first credit, he played the Mummy in Monster Squad. Summer of '87. Yeah.
I love that. That's great. Also written by Shane Black.
Exactly. Yeah. So
wow, that's fun.
The EW article quoted him as saying, "They asked if I could lose a little more weight. I didn't. I'm 98 pounds. That's my top weight, and I'm proud of it." But in Fincher's commentary on the Blu-ray special features over the still photograph section featuring Sloth, and I'll paraphrase here, McKay came in at like 96 pounds. And jokingly, I said, if you lose 10 pounds, you got the job. Later, when I showed up on set, McKay said, I lost 6 pounds. And I was horrified that someone took me seriously.
He's probably joking, or
he might be. But... Yeah, I don't know. He's clearly Fincher has a dark, sort of twisted sense of humor, and we will
for sure
definitely see more of that, certainly in Fight Club. But yeah, so Michael Reed McKay also played Antonio Diego, a.k.a. Skinny Bane, in Joel Schumacher's Batman and Robin in 1997.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah.
What a legacy.
I know. And he also had a small role in Apt Pupil in 1998, so that means he was probably front of the line for a part 5 years later in Bryan Singer's X2, X-Men United, as Jason 143.
I don't remember what that is at X2.
I don't either.
Oh, he's the guy in the wheelchair who can, like, control people's minds?
Oh, he's the son of Stryker?
Yeah.
The guy in the wheelchair who can control people's minds, to me, is
Professor
Charles
Xavier. Yeah. I heard it as soon as I said it. Yeah.
So Rob Bottin does deserve some credit here as well. His effects team created full-body prosthetics for McKay. These prosthetics were painted to appear bruised and scarred, and then they painted McKay's skin a pale white, and then they drew little veins on it to make him look just extra gross. And then he was fitted with gelatin sores, overgrown fingernails, skeletal teeth, and matted hair, a process that took up to 14 hours to apply, which required him to be in the makeup chair at 5 a.m. so that they could begin filming his scene at 8 p.m. Can you imagine? Like, that sounds fucking miserable. And then he had to remain perfectly still during the filming, which isn't easy because the set was freezing. In one interview with Darius Kanji, who we'll talk about in a minute, he described this dilapidated apartment that they filmed in, saying that they had to pick crack pipes and needles up off the floor before filming, and then they'd like put down their own fake crack pipes and needles on the floor. But McKay's laying there in a freezing apartment. They keep spraying him with water to make him glisten, I guess. So he's freezing there, but having to stay perfectly still. And he said it was a relief when he finally got to the scene where he gets to cough. He's like, I finally get to move. Which, by the way, surprised the other actors because they had no idea that it was a real person laying there. They just thought it was a prosthetic. So the shock that you see on John C. McGinley's face is real.
Oh, it's such a great moment, too.
It's great. And knowing that he was genuinely surprised during that, when you watch it, makes it even better.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Because, I mean, you can tell he really lets that line of dialogue just drip off of his tongue, and then it is a hard 180 backpedal as soon as McKay coughs.
Yep.
So the fifth body, the blonde, Lust, is played by set decorator Jennifer Mueller, credited as Kat Mueller, no relation to Cookie Mueller, in case anybody's wondering. She said one of the perks was being naked in front of Brad Pitt in that EW article. But if you look at the still photographs taken by Peter Sorrell, which his photographs of this shoot are gorgeous, by the way, they clearly show Mueller in makeup, gagged, and on the bed, but not nude. And you can see more of her work in Fincher's Zodiac and The Curious Case of Benjamin Button.
She supposedly got that job, like Fincher's assistant just came up to her and pulled her to the side as like, do you fancy playing a dead prostitute in this movie? Because and literally apparently said, because you got the personality for it and definitely the body.
Wow.
And I don't know what that means exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's nice to know I've got a career to fall back on. So actually, we've got a little bit of a bonus victim here. Traumatized, but not killed, the crazed man in the massage parlor is played by character actor Leland Orser. He's in a ton of stuff. But really quick, he had 4 appearances in the Star Trek franchise, all 3 Taken movies, The Bone Collector in 1999, and the one Alien movie that we haven't covered yet here on the show, Alien Resurrection in 1997.
That guy, I read an interview with him where he said, yeah, I went totally method for this role. And I was like,
Wait, what does that mean? Did you strap a knife under your dick?
Yeah, right. You murdered a prostitute with your giant bladed strap on. I don't know if that's what is method for that exactly. But what he really meant was he studied a lot of trauma victims and he wanted to portray it very accurately. So he like learned to get himself to hyperventilate and like would just like rapidly breathe in and out before the take and just like so he could start hyperventilating. And like he didn't sleep for days before the scene because he wanted to be like disoriented or whatever. Anyway, it's just crazy how much he does it. And I think he got his wish there because one of his things was I think just didn't want anything cut. So
yeah.
he is in there.
He's great. He's really good.
Great.
He's a great character actor. He's the kind of guy that you see like just pop up in stuff all the time.
Yeah, looking at what he does in the very limited time that he has on screen, it is. I think it really starts to send home like the idea of like, oh, this is so terrifying for someone to endure.
Imagine.
Yeah. So the sixth body, Pride, is played by Heidi Shantz. She was actually a last-minute replacement, although I'm not sure who she replaced. They needed a model, so models tend to have their own photos, and they needed one who had their own photos so they could be blown up and used to decorate the set. And while she was lying on the bed with her nose taped down, wearing a nightie, she was being drizzled in blood by Fincher when she said, "David, you're enjoying this way too much." To which Fincher replied, "I have demons you can't even imagine." She retired from acting in 2003. And then finally, the seventh body. Now, fellas, we talked a little bit about my detection and research skills, but unfortunately, sad to say, there is no information that I found about the dead dog. So we're just going to have to leave that as a mystery.
I forgot there's even a dead
I've
dog.
got some information. His name is Randy, and he is just fine. He's living happily in San Paulo, California.
Did he get the SAG daily rate of 522 days to lay there dead?
Yeah.
Yep.
Nice.
I just wanted to feel better about it. I'm going to be honest with you, though. Like Justin, I don't remember a dead dog, so I don't know if I'm depraved or what.
I think he just briefly is shown on the road or something. But yeah, when Todd said something about a dead dog, I was like, is there a dead dog in this movie? I had to look up. I went to doesthedogdie.com to see, and he's briefly seen laying in a road. He's not part of the plot at all.
Yeah, well,
if you don't use doesthedogdie.com, you should definitely check it out. It's a requirement in my household. Anytime an animal is on screen, especially in a horror movie, I have to look it up for my wife and let her know for sure if this dog is going to die or any animal.
It's funny that we joke about it, but it seems like this is really kind of the one comedic tension break in this movie.
The dead dog?
The dead dog, yeah, because it's like, what do you got? Dead dog. And John Doe turns and is like, I didn't do that. Like,
oh, yeah. That is good.
It's a solid
that is a good moment.
Yeah,
you're right. That is a good moment. Yeah, that and the amazing vibrating apartment are about
Yes.
the only two bits of levity in the entire movie.
Yeah.
So, filming for Seven commenced in December of 1994, and location filming took place entirely in downtown Los Angeles, although the filmmakers went to a lot of effort to disguise the city, since the city that the story takes place in is intentionally left vague in the script. To create the film's unique style, Fincher worked very closely with his design team, which included production designer Arthur Max, costume designer Michael Kaplan, and cinematographer Darius Kanji, all of whom have some serious pedigree in the filmmaking world. So Arthur Max, starting with him, interestingly enough, began his career not in film, but as a stage lighting designer in the late 1960s. During this stint in his career, he helped to design the famous Fillmore East music venue as well as the historic Woodstock Festival, before going on to design concert lighting for several prominent rock bands, most notably Pink Floyd during their concert tours in the 1970s. And then in the mid-1980s, he dipped his toe in the film industry, working as an assistant for several English production designers before stepping out on his own, spending about a decade as a production designer for TV commercials, and it was during that time, working on commercials, that he became associated with two directors that he would work with multiple times over the years, Ridley Scott and David Fincher. In fact, Seven was his first feature film as a production designer, and if you look at his list of credits since 1995, of the 18 features that he's worked on, 17 of those were either for Scott or Fincher. Now, I feel like we've brought Ridley Scott's name up a lot over the course of this series already, and not only because of the Alien franchise connection, but because Fincher seems to really admire Scott, and as a fan of Scott's work, seems to hire a lot of the behind-the-scenes crew who have previously worked with Scott. Costume designer Michael Kaplan has also worked extensively with Ridley Scott over the years, and in fact began his career as a costume designer on one of Fincher's favorite films, which is Blade Runner.
Yeah, that one I loved, because there was something about this movie this time that when I was watching it, it was like, there's something about this aesthetic that I really love. And I thought about, because of these past couple of episodes, that I was like, oh man, it's the Blade Runner aesthetic. It feels
all
like
of the rain and everything.
Noir. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was
Very
like,
much,
oh, it's just that. It's brutal, but it's like, also for some reason, it's like kind of a cozy feeling to me, and I cannot explain it, but it's like like I just like that vibe for some reason.
Yeah.
And so it always intrigues me. But I really noticed it the last time I watched it. I was like, oh, this was Blade Runner.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah, very cool. So
And I know we'll talk more about that in a second, but I don't know, just thought of that.
So while both Kaplan and Max had already been in the business for quite a while by this point, cinematographer Darius Kanji was still relatively early in his career. Kanji is a French cinematographer who began his career in his native country, most notably with the films Delicatessen and The City of Lost Children, both co-directed by Jean-Pierre Jeunet, who would go on to direct Alien Resurrection. Hey. And while that franchise connection is pretty fun, those two movies also serve as a pretty close visual link to Seven, and were probably pretty instrumental in him getting the job. Seven was actually Kanji's first American production, and it immediately established him as one of the best in the business. And he is truly like one of my favorite cinematographers out there. He has gone on to work with some of the best directors in the world, including Bernardo Bertolucci, Neil Jordan, Roman Polanski, Danny Boyle, Woody Allen, Sidney Pollack, Wong Kar-wai, Michael Haneke, James Gray, Bong Joon-ho, and the Safdie brothers. I mean, that is a hell of a list of directors to have worked with. Like, it is insane. Yeah. Fincher and Kanji worked to give Seven a dark color palette befitting the story that they were telling. You can't shoot this movie and have it in bright, shining colors. And the look that they created is what Kanji describes as a heightened sense of reality, a realism that's been kicked up several notches and becomes its own style. So to achieve this, he used a really interesting technique called that he calls it resilvering. It's a technique that he had previously used on Delicatessen and The City of Lost Children. So forgive me for getting a little bit technical here for about 30 seconds, because this is going to be about the technicality of how film actual film works. Because you see, normally when they make the prints that are going to be projected in a movie theater, silver is taken out, partially to save money, and partly because a more bland, less contrasted look is generally believed to be what audiences want to see. But he wanted to create something darker here. So in this resilvering technique, as the name applies, silver is put back in to the print during the processing of the film. And I don't know how. I don't know how that part of the process works because I'm not technically smart enough to know that. But by doing that, it creates these rich blacks and highly desaturated colors. So that's why Seven looks the way that it looks. And it looks fantastic. Now, normally when this movie, most theaters don't have the resilvered prints because they're expensive. There's an upcoming 4K restoration of Seven coming out in a couple of months, and I'm really hoping that that's what they use because I'd love to see. Because the version I watched on HBO Max looks incredible. I think the 4K on there looks incredible. So I can only imagine it if it looked even better, because it's a beautiful looking film. But as the dailies started coming back and the studio started watching them, they started complaining that the picture was too dark, and Kanji even suggested to Fincher that they lighten up the prints, and Fincher refused. He wanted it dark. He did not want to make it any brighter. He would not do it. He wasn't going to compromise. And the studio's complaints did eventually stop after some of the footage was cut together into a promotional reel and screened at Show West, which is a convention for movie theater owners that happens every year, and that the footage was very well received. So at that point, they kind of had to stop complaining about it because obviously people are digging what they're seeing.
Mm-hmm. That stuff about Kanji is interesting to me because I was reading about how Fincher had talked about wanting to do how did he describe it? It was something like the kind of film Friedkin would do, is what he said. A tidy genre movie. And so that's what it was. He said I would like to do a tidy genre movie, kind of like what Friedkin might have made after The Exorcist. That was the quote.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, so I thought that was kind of neat. And also that I think one of the first things he told the crew and everything was he was trying to make genre black and white movie in color or something, which was what Kanji was great for. The thing about Fincher that I really, really love, and it goes back to we were talking about Alien 3, how we talked about where the person was moving something on the set and then Fincher went up and moved it himself and is we're not making a movie for people that watch a movie one time, we're making it for people that watch movies 5 times. Just the detail work that goes into a David Fincher movie. I mean, there's all kinds of Easter egg stuff in here. As I was watching commentary and stuff like that, you'd get all kinds of notable stuff. As during one scene when they're walking into the DA's office, there's newspapers talking about the murder or something like that. And there's an article in the corner that says something housekeeper held hostage by child's possessed gerbil, 3 days of terror or something like that. And it says neighbor's beagle scares teen, cures 8-year bout with hiccups. And just stupid little
things that only they're going to know is there.
That. Yeah, the more obvious ones that you can look for that are actually really fun to me are when they... everybody always notices Kevin Spacey the next time around, as the photographer that's the newspaper photographer or whatever, right, that's snuck into one of the places. But he's also I didn't know until this round of watching it that he's also, when they're in Wild Bill's leather store and they're looking up information or trying to get information, the clerk says there, he had a limp. I remember that about him. And literally right outside the building, if you look through the door that's behind them, there's a person with an umbrella staring into the room, and he's pacing back and forth with a limp.
Oh,
and
no
so
shit.
He's there too.
I've never noticed that.
Jeez.
Wow.
Yeah, so he's there. He's watching them throughout, and I love that about it.
Yeah.
And,
See, I thought that was a reference to Usual Suspects.
No, I mean, you see him limping later on when they're chasing him.
Right.
So I just thought, that was just confirmation of that.
Mm.
Yeah. It's just wicked. He's watching them in the leather shop too. And I never noticed that before. And when, there's the other stuff you're talking about, the Zodiac thing. I mean, when he lists his motives during some of that, one of them he gives is Jodie Foster told me to do it.
Yeah.
That's a John Hinckley.
That's a John Hinckley thing. Yeah.
Yeah, he tried to kill Ronald Reagan.
Yep.
That was his reason. My dog told me to do it. That's Son of Sam.
Yep.
I think John Doe says both of those.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so speaking of detail, to go even further into it, if we're not bored already, the notebooks in that room, when they get to John Doe's place, those are real. And like these designers, Clive Piercy and John Sable, they went in there and every single one of those was supposedly handwritten specifically for the film.
It's insane.
Although, yeah, which is insane because there's so many. And now it says if you like freeze frame it or whatever, it is like a lot of them have the same things written over and over again in them, but they are handwritten. I think there were like something like 6 or so that had like really more detailed stuff or something in them.
The ones that were probably going to be seen more on screen.
Yeah. I don't know. Just reading that was nuts because I think it took them 2 months to do all of that. It cost like $15,000 altogether. Yeah. And if you hear Somerset in it, by the end of it, like when he's going through it, he says there's like 2,000 of them is what he says. I don't know if that's exactly right.
Yeah, there probably weren't really in real life, but there are a lot.
Yeah. He said, I think he says something like it'd take like 50 men reading in shifts 2 months to read all of these books. And so like I don't know, just interesting to me. But speaking of that detail, those also show up at the beginning of the film in an awesome opening of Seven.
Yeah.
Where you see the hands cutting up different things. And you get the cool title sequence that is like a wicked music video that even if you don't know it right at the beginning, you think this feels like a 9 Inch Nails video or something.
Right, yeah.
But
it's got that look. It's a great opening title sequence.
Yeah.
Oh, it is. And that title sequence, it was originally David Fincher's idea was one of his buddies, Mark Romanek, who was with, what was his?
Propaganda Films, yeah.
Propaganda Films, yeah. Mark Romanek had done 9 Inch Nails music video for Closer, so they were just gonna, since this is a remix of Closer, it's done by Coyle and Danny Hyde. I heard somebody or read somebody call it Nail on Chalkboard remix of Closer. And so that version of it, anyway.
It's almost unrecognizable.
It is.
Until the end. Yeah, until the end when you hear him say, "You get me closer to God." Before then, you almost can't tell that it's a 9 Inch Nails song.
Yeah, and while we're there, too, the rest of the music, by the way, is done by our friend Howard Shore, who's a buddy of Cronenberg, who did some stuff with him.
Did a lot. Most of Cronenberg's movies were done by Howard Shore, and he's going to pop up again. He does a few more David Fincher movies down the line. He also did a little movie called Lord of the Rings, or a trilogy called Lord of the Rings you may have heard of. Okay. He began his career as the musical director on a show called Saturday Night Live. So, yeah, he's done some stuff.
Lord of the Rings and Seven, another perfect double feature.
or just great soundtracks to play your child to sleep at night.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Lullabies.
Anyway, back to the title sequence. That job ended up going to a man named Kyle Cooper, who is arguably the most prolific title sequence guy ever. He did the Marvel flip page logo that we first saw in Spider-Man.
Wow.
Yeah. And so another connection to Spider-Man, by the way, so, with David Koepp. That guy, I mean, if you don't know Kyle Cooper, you look up what he's done. He's done like a ton of stuff. He did like the Home Alone opening sequence kind of stuff.
Wow.
He did, I'm trying to remember the others. I think he did both, like the first 2 Home Alones and like Last Action Hero and a bunch of stuff like that. So he's done some cool ones. Anyway, I think now he's been hired and completed like 350 opening movie title sequences or whatever.
That's nuts. That's insane.
Yeah.
For Todd's sake, we should also mention that he did the opening titles for Star Trek Discovery.
Are you serious? Really?
Yeah.
Oh man, I missed that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Those are dope titles.
His Seven opening title gets some comparisons to Kill a Mockingbird, and it should, because he continuously in interviews seems to reference that as his favorite movie ever.
Okay.
And so He felt an immediate connection with everything, so he was pitching Fincher on this. Like, he wanted to do it, and he was talking about an evolution of a technique he'd used before. He said, quote, "I had done a lot of tabletop shoots. I had just shot money burning for dead presidents, and in fact, cutting God out of the dollar bill. So I thought of that when I was looking at the dollar bill with the word God burning in it, and I was thinking about what John Doe might do." He says, when I was a kid and I would watch horror movies, the monster didn't come out until the third act, and that was how it was going to be here. And I was lucky to watch Seven early on, and I remember thinking, I wish we could see the killer earlier to somehow like introduce what kind of person they are. And so he said he asked Fincher to see all of the props and everything and found the notebooks and all the excessive writing in them. And he thought, hey, this is it. We'll just do like a tabletop shot of them and have it be about preparing the notebooks and how John Doe took it very seriously to meticulously prep them and stuff like that. Because originally Fincher had planned it was going to be a train ride where it was the music playing over Somerset, just riding from the city to his like retirement house.
Home.
Yeah. That's what they were going to do. But Fincher fell in love with the notebook creation idea. Then it was sold.
And it's iconic. I mean, it's one of the most iconic like opening title sequences in movie history. And we don't talk about like opening titles on this show very often because a lot of times they're kind of an afterthought. But this one, what I like about it, I'm glad you brought it up because it really does become part of the storytelling in the movie, you know, by introducing like an element of the killer early on. And you don't know, if you haven't seen the movie, you don't know what's going on necessarily until you see those notebooks show up later on. But it's a really cool use of foreshadowing while also serving as, you know, the credits.
Yeah, and speaking of the title of the movie, which I don't know why they had to put the 7 in the name. I hate it. Agree with that.
It's annoying. It's so annoying.
But he and Fincher did get together on how that would look, how the 7, like the logo or whatever, would look, and it's hand drawn. It's mixed with the font Helvetica, however you say that.
Helvetica. Yeah, Helvetica. Yep, that's right.
Yeah. He said he wrote it out for him and he was like super excited about it. And so they made sure it was drawn by hand, and because they felt like they wanted it to look like the killer was doing it himself.
Yeah.
And so they did that. Anyway, like it all panned out because I think in 2011, I think was the year, IFC ranked Seven as having the third greatest title sequence of all time, behind Richard Lester's A Hard Day's Night and Saul Bass's Vertigo.
I was about to say Vertigo's got to be up there. Vertigo was number 1.
Yeah, Vertigo. Well, you know what? I don't remember the exact order now.
I bet Vertigo.
I know
was number
it was
1.
Hard Day's Night and Vertigo were the first two.
And there's a fantastic website called Art of the Title if you're ever interested in that kind of stuff. Like that website has some incredible interviews with the people who create these things. It's a really wonderful website just in general if you're a movie fan.
Great to mention them because that's where I got most of that information. So
yeah, they're awesome. They're the only ones kind of focusing on that kind of stuff. So fantastic work on that website. All right, so while we're still kind of on the subject of the film's visual style, let's talk about all the rain, because there's a lot of rain in this movie that we've already mentioned a little bit already. But it's one of the movie's kind of defining visual motifs. And I had always assumed that it was a purely aesthetic choice, one that added to the overall feeling of despair in the film, and one that made it kind of harder to distinguish what city the movie took place in. And I was, in doing the research for this, I found out that I was at least partially right. Although Fincher has given conflicting statements on the rain in a couple different interviews that I read. In one of them, he explains that it was a purely artistic choice, or he kind of implies that it was, saying, I was looking for something so that there wasn't any escape. You couldn't go, I'm in this horrible, cramped, dark room, and I'm going to go outside because outside isn't all that much better. But then in another interview, he described the rain as a purely pragmatic decision. Because you see, Brad Pitt was only available for a set amount of time 55 days to be exact, because he was set to start filming Terry Gilliam's 12 Monkeys immediately after Seven. So they began shooting this in LA, and it was raining. So since the film was shot entirely on location with a finite number of shooting days because of Brad Pitt's availability, they couldn't risk any continuity issues by having rain on some days and not rain on others. So they just made the decision to make it look like it was raining all of the time.
Yeah, we've already mentioned it a little bit already, but it really does add to the aesthetic of the overall film. You know, that Blade Runner vibe. You could read into it and be like, the city itself is crying, like it. Just kind of puts this general sadness on screen at all times. And then when you see John Doe get out of the cab is when I first, the rain has stopped. And it's a tonal shift, and it's the lack of rain at that point is it's
almost shocking.
Yeah, it is. It's almost shocking. And I thought that was really, really fascinating.
Yeah. I absolutely agree. I think it is a major element in the film. So whether it was artistic or just, a pragmatic decision, like he said, either way, it works fantastically, and you cannot think of Seven without thinking of it, because it just adds to the doom and gloom feeling of the whole movie.
Very much.
So although he had been attracted to Seven because of its scale was much smaller than Alien 3's, it didn't take long before this production began to become a little more complicated and difficult than Fincher had anticipated. Speaking to Sight and Sound in 1996, Fincher said, "I thought I was making a tiny genre movie. I tried not to have 100 fucking trucks, but every time you take the camera out of the box, it gets complicated." and the constant rain, of course, added to the difficulty of the shoot, because they've got, when it's not actually raining, they've got giant rainmakers out there. So they're wet all the time. So that does not make a shoot easy at all. And one of the most difficult scenes for them to shoot was the one where Mills is chasing John Doe through his apartment building. Kanji explained that this scene was so tough to pull off because of its complexity. It's a long scene, for one thing. There's a lot of fast camera movement, and a lot of it handheld, unlike most of the film. And a lot of that movement takes place in tight, barely lit interiors. And remember, this was shot all on location. These are real buildings in downtown LA. They're not shooting these on like sound stages that they built for the most part. And then it ends outdoors, where the cast and crew are being pummeled by heavy rain. Now, for this scene, Brad Pitt insisted on doing his own stunts, and at one point, he slipped on a rain-slicked car, and he crashed through the windshield, cutting his arm so badly that David Fincher says that he saw exposed bone. And Pitt sustained injuries to tendons and nerves in his left hand, and then for the remainder of the shoot, they had to either write the injury into the story, which is why you see him with a bandaged hand in the later scenes in the film, and for any unfilmed scenes, because they're not shooting it in sequence. So for any of the scenes that they hadn't shot yet that take place before he sustained that injury, they just had to obscure his hand or his hands in his pocket, just whatever they had to do to hide the injury.
In reading that, because I found that, as I was going through stuff too, and it I don't know why, but it made me think of Jackie Chan in Rumble in the Bronx from 1995. He had hurt his ankle, but he kept doing the stuff, and they basically just put a sock over the casket. His cast, and made it look like a shoe. So, all that to say is that Jackie Chan and Brad Pitt are essentially the same person.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I feel like I bet there's multiple Jackie Chan stories that are very similar to that one on Rumble in the Bronx.
That's true. Yeah,
I've been working my way through a lot of his filmography in the last few weeks, and that man, I don't know how he's not in a casket.
Right. Exactly.
He is insane. So I do want to talk about this chase scene a little bit, because it is one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie. It is smack dab in the middle of the film. It comes kind of along at a point where we've already spent an hour-ish immersed in the story's darkness, So when this scene happens, Mills and Somerset, they've been one step behind John Doe this whole time, but thanks to some shady dealings with the FBI, with Mark Boone Jr., they found his apartment, and just as they're knocking on his door, Doe shows up from a grocery run, which is kind of the only time that we see John Doe doing anything like a normal human would be. He's got to go grocery shopping.
Right, yeah.
Which then this leads Doe to firing a gun at the detectives and leading them on a cat and mouse chase through this dingy apartment building. Now, the original version of this scene that appears in Walker's first draft, which you can read on his website. Andrew Kevin Walker's website is great because he's got a bunch of his scripts uploaded there, although most of them are earlier versions of the script. That's probably a legality thing, but you can read them on there, and he's got his entire first draft of Seven on his website to read. And this scene plays out a little bit differently, a lot differently, actually, in the original draft. In that version, Doe whips out an Uzi.
Whoa.
and opens fire and runs away. And that's it. That's the scene. Like he pulls out a machine gun, shoots at Mills and Somerset, and then that's enough for him to just leave, and he runs away. There's no big long chase. The longer version that we see in the film didn't show up until the production draft in 1994 or so, after Fincher was already involved. So it's possible that it was either done, Fincher made a suggestion to turn this into a chase, or it's something that he and Walker kind of cooked up together after they started working on the film together. But regardless, I think the chase itself, and part of the reason I like it so much probably, is because it's sort of a microcosm of Fincher's controlled approach to storytelling and how he uses filmmaking tools to his advantage. Because David Fincher, as we've already noted, rarely uses a handheld camera. He likes dolly shots, he likes Steadicam shots, he likes long, smooth camera movements. And in one interview, he explained, here's a little quote from him here. He says, "Handheld has a powerful psychological stranglehold. It means something specific, and I don't want to cloud what's going on with too much meaning." So he doesn't want to use handheld a lot. So his use of handheld here is very intentional. It places the audience in the chaos of the moment. He wants the audience to feel the same sense of panic that Mills and Somerset do during that scene. So he uses these handheld POV shots where, you've got Mills peering around corners, not knowing if he's going to see a bullet flying towards his face. Like it's a very kind of scary chase sequence. Here's another quote from him about this. He says, "Well, normally in movies, characters just run pell-mell after an antagonist. I always thought, God, if someone was shooting at me, I would be terrified to turn any corner. If you set it up properly and put the audience in that subjective place, handheld is the perfect way to get that feeling." And I think this is honestly kind of brilliant because I just love the way his brain works, because in a typical action movie chase, there's not really any emotional investment in the scene. It's just an action scene for the fun of it or whatever. But the way he's doing it here, the audience experiences the human aspect of the chase, specifically fear, because you're put in the mindset of Mills, especially as he's peering around these corners, because you get these POV shots from Mills's point of view. So it creates a fear in the audience that you wouldn't have in a typical just, shoot 'em up action scene. So
did you say that was Fincher that originally thought of that?
I don't know if it's Fincher that thought of it. As
I
far as
couldn't remember who said the quote was.
Oh, yes, that quote was Fincher. Yes.
Yeah, I think maybe it was the commentary. I can't remember, but he actually says somewhere I saw where he said he got it from Brad Pitt, who, when they decided to do the chase scene, that Brad Pitt told him, I hate these chase scenes where the chaser always seems to know where the person being chased is.
Yeah.
And that's what triggered it. And he kind of ran with it. And he said in there, I had a quote from him where he said something like, I like the idea of the guy with clay feet going, "I'm not trying to get shot."
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. He's not just running after him shooting. It's he is trying not to die while still doing his job and catching the killer. But it's different than if you were watching, I don't know, an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie where he's just shooting after a guy like he's unstoppable. It makes Mills seem like a real human, and it makes it a lot scarier. And so that's what I mean when I say that Fincher knows how and when to use the filmmaking tools at his disposal, because if handheld were used throughout the whole film, it wouldn't have any impact during this scene. But using it sparingly at just the right time creates a massive impact. And it should also be noted that the only other time that he uses handheld in this whole film is in the finale, when we see the helicopter shots. We've got some handheld shots there, which again is a very tense scene, both from the visual point of view, and you've got the noise and everything from the helicopter and the people talking on walkie-talkie, so it's very chaotic because they don't know what's going on. So that handheld use kind of adds to that. I think I wanted to bring that up because there's a lot of talk about how good Fincher's films look, and they look great. They look really good. And there's a style to his work that comes from his background in music videos and commercials, so there's like a slickness to them. But I'm even more impressed by his use of technique because he makes decisions that are always in service of the story that he's telling, not just because they look cool.
Yeah, very much. We joked a little bit about my experience in law enforcement earlier, and I hesitate to joke a lot about it just because it was not a great time in my life. But at the times that I had to get into foot pursuits or anything even close to that, it is incredibly stressful. And I think there is actually a line of dialogue before this scene where Mills and Somerset are they're in the police department, and they're kind of breaking down who John Doe is. And one of the things that always stuck out to me, and I don't know if it sort of hammered home, it's hammered home for sure in this chase sequence, but one of the last things Somerset says about John Doe is that he's patient. And you can tell, like, because in a foot pursuit, it's, can I get to cover really quick? Can I outrun this person? And it is constant running. But you can tell that he gets to certain corners and positions himself because he knows Mills is right behind him. And Mills,
but he also knows the apartment building.
And he
too.
also,
He
knows this area. So they're on his turf. And, the fact that, he peeks through that window and he's still just there with the gun in the air and, unloads 3 or 4 rounds into that window at Mills. It's just kind of like he is, and he does that a couple times. It's like he is waiting for him around every corner, and it is, it just hammers home. He is patient, and that is incredibly dangerous. The foot pursuit is a very, very dangerous thing for an officer to engage in.
I don't know where else this relates to it, but by the way, one of the quotes I got from David Fincher when I was looking up stuff about Seven that I really liked and could just go with his ideas for the way he shoots things. He mentions one thing he learned from ILM is that a director should look at a scene with the left eye for composition because it goes to the right brain. Focus, or the technical side of a shot, should be looked at with the right eye or the left brain, as it's more your technical side. And then he says, my eyes are 2 different colors, so all bets are off.
That's funny. One thing, speaking about composition and speaking about that chase scene, one of my favorite shots in this movie is that one where when John Doe finally gets the jump on Brad Pitt, on Mills, and you've got that really, really shallow focus scene of the gun up to his head, where you kind of see him blurry in the background. And it reminds me of the scene in Alien 3 where Sigourney's, that iconic shot that we talked about in the last episode.
Oh, yeah. You're right. I didn't even piece that together, but you're totally right.
The alien has her in a corner, and then just John Doe does the same thing, and like the audience expects this is, oh, you're fucked, right?
Yeah.
But then John Doe, just like the Xenomorph, unexpectedly, lets him go. So, I don't know if that was intentional.
I can't believe I didn't notice that. That's good.
I don't know if it was intentional on Fincher's part, but it's, having watched them that closely and we talked so much about that scene, I couldn't help but think of it, Filming for Seven concluded in March of 1995, and as the film entered post-production, the ending remained a point of contention between the filmmakers and the executives at New Line. Fincher's original ending would have actually been even darker than the one in the final film. He intended to suddenly cut to black as soon as Mills shoots John Doe, hoping to stun the audience as the credits began to roll. So, his idea was Mills pulls the trigger, you see a burst of blood from John Doe's head, and then cut to black. And when they held test screenings with this ending, Fincher instructed the staff at the theater, wherever they were doing the test screenings, he told them to keep the lights turned off following the cut to black. Don't let the lights up immediately. Like, let them sit in this for a minute so that the audience could really take it in. But these instructions were not followed, undercutting the impact of the scene. And Fincher, after that screening, he recalled that one of the audience members at the test screening walked by him saying, "The people who made that movie should be killed," which I'm sure made him feel great. It probably didn't help that New Line set unrealistic expectations for that test audience. So when they invited people to the screening, they only told them that it was for a new movie starring Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman, who had just both starred in Legends of the Fall and The Shawshank Redemption. So audiences were expecting probably something more like those two movies, not something as bleak and nihilistic as Seven. So that wasn't a really fair thing to do. And the test audience reactions only motivated the studio to push for even more for a different conclusion. You know, they pushed Fincher to shoot a more heroic ending for Mills in which he didn't kill Doe. They even suggested, at one point, that the head in the box be one of Mills's dogs and not Tracy's. Although I cannot imagine that would sit well with audiences either. People get more mad about dogs dying. That's why that website exists.
Yeah.
Does the dog die? Because people get upset. So that can't have been any better.
Yeah.
Morgan Freeman, like the previously discussed alternative where Somerset kills Doe, the one that in the burned out church, I think, you know, he would have, they even had a one-liner for him where he kills Doe and just says, "I'm retired," which is silly, I think.
Yeah.
It doesn't fit the movie. It's like, this is not an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, right? But Fincher and Pitt both thought that Mills needed to be the one to kill Doe in order to make the film thematically cohesive. And that ending, it's not just for shock value. It's kind of the entire thesis of the movie.
Or Somerset does do it and says, "I'm too old for this shit." Am I the only person who sees this?
That would have been okay. That one I would have been okay with.
Now, the way you said it, though, it makes it sound like he was trying to be like a badass action guy. The way I understood it was, listening to him talk about it, was that it was supposed to be like he's depressed, like he is done. He's like, "I'm retiring." And,
no, well, I think what it was that he doesn't. Mills has his entire life and career to look forward to. Somerset's going to be retired. This is his last case regardless, so it's not going to ruin his career to kill a perp. So that's kind of, I think, where it came from. But just having that line where he says, "I'm retired," it makes it sound like action movie one-liner, you know? Mm-hmm. But I think the real thing is that, like, yes, he is literally is retired, so he doesn't have anything to lose, and Brad Pitt does.
My favorite supposedly legit suggestion also for In the Box was going to be a TV monitor showing Tracy kidnapped and in peril, but they can rescue her.
What was it plugged into?
What's it plugged into? I don't know. I don't know what it's fucking plugged into. That's what's funny about it. So everybody was pretty adamant that no, it is a head in a fucking box.
Yeah,
that's what it is.
That's what it is. That's what it needs to be.
You mentioned talking about like the thing had come out and said like Brad Pitt, Morgan Freeman being there at the test screening. You know, do you want to see the movie with Brad Pitt, Morgan Freeman, or whatever it was? The Fincher, in a quote in an interview talking about that test screening, says, "I don't know what the fuck they thought they were going to see, but I'm telling you, from the reaction of the people in there, they were bristling. They could not have been more offended." You mentioned the people saying whoever made it should be killed. He said somebody else at the screening came up to him afterwards and said, "Don't be depressed, man. You'll probably get another job."
Wow. Well, Fincher and Pitt, they refused to compromise. And let's be real, Pitt probably had more pull at this point than Fincher did because he's a big star, you know, and they ended up settling on a longer epilogue. Instead of that immediate cut to black, they decided on a longer epilogue that shows Mills getting arrested and then Somerset delivering his narration with that Ernest Hemingway quote, which at least hinted at a little bit of hope. So the studio was happier with that.
I 100%, from some stuff I read, it seemed like Pitt was a huge part of that helped get that over, like you said, the bigger pool. That, going back to what I had said before about where he was very adamant about being honest to what the character would do. Supposedly, like, one of the arguments he kept making was like, I know this character front and back, and I am telling you, there is no way in hell that David Mills, who kicks down doors first and finds probable cause later, is not the person that shoots this man.
Yeah, he's absolutely right.
And I love that that Pitt was so adamant about it too.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. And you know, this ending, we said it before, but it is a big part. It's not the only part, but it's a big part of why this movie is considered the classic that it is. So I want to dig into that ending just a little bit. And first, to get it out of the way, because we've used this word to describe this movie several times already throughout this episode, but Seven is a deeply nihilistic film. It has this idea that life is bleak and meaningless. The city itself is a manifestation of that. Doe himself is a nihilist, although he seems to think there's a higher meaning to his work. In the end, he doesn't value any human life, including his own, you know. But the culmination of the film's nihilism is in its ending. Unlike most movies in the detective, police, thriller genre, the good guys do not win. Doe turns himself in, and even his death is sort of a win for him, you know? And because he turns himself in so early, the audience is robbed of the satisfaction of seeing him captured like you would in a normal police movie. John Doe's ultimate plan is to have Mills, embodying the sin of wrath, kill him since he embodies the sin of evil, and I keep saying evil, since he embodies the sin of envy, and it works. The bad guy wins. John Doe wins in this movie at the end. And the thing with that really got me watching it this time, because I've seen this movie so many times, but the ending of this, it's inevitable. The ending was always inevitable. John Doe always has the upper hand. I think Morgan Freeman says that during the movie.
Yeah.
And he also says, this isn't going to have a happy ending. And that's sort of like, that's almost like a mission statement for the movie. I saw this movie. I didn't see it in theaters when it came out, but I saw it because I was a little young when it came out to see it in theaters, but I did see it on video not long after it came out. So I've known what's in the box for the last 25 years. And that ending and the entire last act still works like gangbusters for me. And in fact, I think that its effectiveness is heightened by knowing where the story is headed. Gary, this goes back to that quote that you had from Fincher during the filming of Alien 3, where he says he's not making a movie for someone who's going to watch it one time. He's making it for someone who's going to watch it 5 times. And I think that probably applies to all of David Fincher's movies. And when you rewatch Seven, it becomes pretty clear that this was the only way that this movie was going to end. There were always going to be 7 victims, and everything that leads up to the finale is just a journey towards that inevitability, which makes, in my opinion, makes it even tougher to stomach because there's no way to avoid where it all leads. David Fincher he doesn't sugarcoat things. This is a dark, uncaring world, and that's what he's trying to portray here. I found a really great quote from him from an interview with Playboy from 2014, where he kind of summed up his point of view like this. He says, quote, "If you didn't get hugged enough as a kid, you won't find what you're looking for from me. That's not my gig, and I'm not attuned to it." Jeez, and I love that quote because that kind of sums up David Fincher, which I think is great because I think David Fincher's got this really... He's straightforward, but he's also got a really dark sense of humor. I think he's really funny, but he's only really funny if you find his dark sense of humor funny, and I do.
Yeah, you know, in talking about the ending, I don't think anybody in their right mind would ever question the iconic nature of the ending of this movie.
No.
Head in the box. You know, what's in the box is. You know, speaking of things that could go on T-shirts, it could absolutely go on a T-shirt. You know, a poster. You know, you name it. It's
what people
iconic.
think of like that. That's what people think of when they think of Seven. Like, hey, did you see that movie? Did you see the movie with the head in the box? Like, that 4K disc that's coming out in a couple of months. There's this big special edition of it that is housed in a replica of the box. Like, it is like a defining part of what this movie's legacy.
Now,
Gwyneth Paltrow, one year I saw during all this research on like her Instagram, her Halloween costume was her with a box on her head.
Brilliant. I love that so much.
Funny.
And that honestly makes me love her. I love that.
Well, in talking about the iconic nature of, I hesitate to really call it a twist. Well, it is a bit of a twist, but
It's a bit of a twist.
The only thing that makes me hold up my hand in argument to anything you just said, Justin, is when you put this ending juxtaposed with the ending of Fight Club. Not to get too far ahead, but like, and again, is that due to Chuck Palahniuk's original story? Is it due to the overall nature of that story being a dark comedy as opposed to this being a more nihilistic, detective noir type fare? But from a film perspective, in looking at what this does to the overall narrative, and again, me being the fresh perspective guy, and again, I don't know that I saw it as early as you did, Justin, but Head in the Box has been in my vernacular for a long, long time as well. And with Understandable, it's an amazing movie. But I don't know that the reveal in this makes me want to start the movie over, as opposed to, Tyler. When you rewatch that movie, immediately the movie becomes different. So I think
this is not really.
Yeah, that's my only thing is like this twist ending versus the twist ending of Fight Club. But in terms of like, I think the question is like, is that due to the script? Is that due to Fincher's direction? Is that due to anything? I don't know, but like, I don't really know that this is a twist in the same way. I mean, a twist is something that's really, yes, this is unexpected. The first time you see it, it's unexpected, but it's not a twist. A twist in a movie really is something, it's like the end of The Sixth Sense. It's something that recontextualizes your entire understanding of everything that came before. Right. This doesn't do that. This doesn't recontextualize anything. It does make a richer viewing experience on rewatch, I think. Because again, like I said, I think it was always an inevitable conclusion. The movie was always barreling towards this ending because that's John Doe's plan. Yeah. But it's not really a twist because it doesn't change the context of everything that came before. Well, I think knowing the ending does change your perception of what's happening before. Right.
I know the first time I saw it, it blew my mind. I will give that. I don't know if you call that a twist or not, but I think for somebody
I would call it a
hoping,
shock, but not a twist.
Right.
Yeah, maybe that's it.
Well, I think the twist, if there is a twist, and this is something that we've actually mentioned at least twice throughout this recording, the twist is actually that John Doe turns himself in. Because
which happens at the end of Act 2.
Right, because at that point, all bets are off. But as opposed to, Jack learning that I think that's much closer to the end. That is kind of like the big reveal. And it's
that's in the last act.
Yeah. So I don't know, but I mean that was my only thought to that. But I think in terms of the ending, and this is a little bit of business, which I don't know that I've ever. I don't know that if this was a bit of direction from Fincher or if this was an acting choice by Brad Pitt or how this came about. But something stuck out to me about the progression of Mills's character. And mostly because I didn't know where else to put this nugget of thought. It's how he handles coffee. When it's weird, but watch how Mills handles coffee at the very beginning. Like he holds it close to his chest and he's very ginger with it. Like he's ready to give it to Somerset. And then when Somerset doesn't take it, he looks around and finds a solid place to put it. And then, as he progresses in, he hands the other one to another officer. Flash forward to later in the movie, you see Mills down a cup, crush it, and just chuck it and not really care about where it lands or the fact that he's littering. I think that's an interesting look of like how Mills has spiraled downwards throughout this investigation. And I mean,
Todd.
Somerset threw it out at the beginning. He's like, this should not be his first assignment. And you see it through this little bit of business with the coffee cups. And it stuck out to me for some reason. But, looking at that again, I think that's an interesting representation or visualization of Mills's character through the use of the coffee cups.
You're not wrong about that, by the way. And I seem to remember never with the coffee cup, so that one gets me. But I totally buy that as valid, as that's intentional, because they also talk about, and I think it was in the commentary again, that like Mills is very intent on things being his way and in a certain order at first, and that you another good example I can think of right off the top of my head, because I don't know why I didn't write anything down about this, but in his apartment, the train keeps going by, but he has a basketball he sets up on the mantle.
Yep.
And he wants to keep it there, but the train goes by and it knocks it off the mantle and it falls. But when it does, he picks it up and puts it right back up on the mantle again.
Yeah.
And it's like he has this like he thinks he controls the situation and he wants it this way.
And he's not in control.
Yeah.
Well, I will say that I think there is maybe one misstep in the ending. Maybe the only misstep in the entire film, because I think this is a damn near perfect movie. And it's maybe the one moment that Fincher compromised his vision for the film, and that's that very last scene that we talked about. I kind of wish that they had just cut to black like Fincher originally wanted to, right when Mills shoots John Doe, because I think that the ending and Freeman's narration feels a little bit untrue to the film that precedes it. He ends the film saying, Ernest Hemingway once wrote, "The world is a fine place and worth fighting for." I agree with the second part. It's a great line, great quote. But in my opinion, it doesn't quite line up with the film's point of view. You know what I mean? What do y'all think? Would you have rather have seen it with the original ending? Am I in the minority here?
I think seeing, because I mean, I'm not going to argue that quote's a great quote. I love it. But I think in seeing, just like I just finished talking about the progressive downward spiral of Mills, it really comes to a head when you see the look of shock still on his face as he's sitting in the back of the patrol car, of just kind of like
hitting him.
Yeah. It's just, and John Doe even said, like, this will be thought about and puzzled over for years or for a long time or for forever. I forget the phrasing, but like, and you can see that it's just not sinking in. It's not sinking in with Mills. And even when he's trying, like after Somerset goes to get the box and Mills is there with the gun on him, you can see John Doe's talking to him, but Mills is not listening. And he's really trying to get, and it's not until he says Tracy's name that breaks his concentration and he finally looks at him. And it's just kind of like, I've been telling you this whole time. Like I've been right. I've said this all along. And to be fair, John Doe could have said, Somerset has been telling you this entire time. Like all these things have been pointing Mills at like, this is bad. You should leave. You should get out now. Tracy even was just like, I hate this city. I want to get out of here. Like, and you can see like when Somerset is there for dinner and he asks him, kind of about the living situation, like Tracy looks at Mills and Mills answers, because just like Gary said, Mills wants to be in control, but he's not, because like the real estate guy screwed him over. Tracy's doing her best to hang on to some semblance of life with Mills in this horrible city. But he is just not in control. And it really comes to a head in that final scene, in that final shot with, and Somerset just kind of reluctantly is just like, whatever he needs, I'll be around.
Yeah. He's running into a brick wall that is a guy who is in control, who is in control of every situation and controlling him. Yeah. And he can't do anything about it. Even go into the scene at the end, and this is even a great, let's give Walker some credit here too. Yeah. That end scene is set out in the desert. I don't know what fucking city they're in, that they came from this rainy ass place
into the desert.
And then they go out into the desert. It's one of those like little Steven Spielberg tricks or something. I don't know. They just like ended up in a totally different part of the country or something. I don't know. Yeah. But they end up out in the desert, and it's bright and it's shiny, and they're like, it's all like juxtaposed with that. And then what I was thinking of just now was that also it's out under those pylons, those electrical towers and stuff. And then you hear like the guys talking about, we can't get radio. Nothing's working. And so like they can't communicate with them down there. So they can't do anything about what's going on. And this is all stuff that John Doe would have set up. Like he wanted
he
that.
knew what he was doing. Yeah. He knew they'd be wired.
He wants Mills alone. Yeah. And he wants to talk to him by himself. And oh, and by the way, just side note, that actually did happen to those guys too.
Yeah,
so
to the crew.
I saw that.
Yeah, when they were.
Yeah, the crew couldn't communicate with each other while they were out there.
I think they had to use cell phones or something. They couldn't use like their normal walkie-talkies or something. Those pylons actually did interfere with their communication out there.
Yeah, and it's just a wicked idea, but there he is. He's like talking to him, and like you said, all the stuff I don't know. It's just like he had perfect control of the situation. Mm-hmm, he set up everything they did was what he wanted them to do. Yeah. And I don't know. It's just that's a wicked thing.
Well, New Line, they didn't have very high expectations for the film because of the low test scores it had gotten during its test screenings. But when the movie opened on September 22nd, 1995, it came in at number 1 at the box office, grossing $14 million during its opening weekend, which was the highest grossing September opening ever at that point. A record that had been previously held by another New Line movie, Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, a movie that is considerably less good than this one. Word of mouth on the film was outstanding, and it remained number 1 during its second weekend of release as well, beating out the newly released Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers, which is also a less good movie than this one. And Seven continued to dominate at the box office for weeks and ultimately grossed more than $327 million worldwide. A little fun fact that I found out is that it was the 7th highest grossing movie of the year that year, which is silly, but I like it.
Well, if you want to go a little further into that, there were 7 crates of cockroaches used during the filming of the gluttony scene. The word fuck is uttered in the movie just over 70 times, most of them by Brad Pitt. Who earned like $7 million for playing the role of David Mills. He receives a phone call telling him about the first murder almost exactly 7 minutes into the film. Summer has 7 days until he leaves the force. All the building numbers in the opening scene begin with the number 7. The courier delivery that kicks off the climax was scheduled at 7 p.m. and arrives just after almost exactly 7 minutes from the end. Mills shoots Doe and creates the final 2 victims in his tableau of the 7 deadly sins. So
wow,
it's
nice.
It's just 7. But if
everywhere.
I could just quickly sidebar on Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers.
Good news, must we? Well, the film received generally positive reviews, although there were some critics out there who disliked it. It wasn't universally loved. Many of its detractors complained about the film's excessive gore. I saw Gene Siskel complain about this, despite the fact that the film actually shows very little gore and doesn't depict a single one of John Doe's killings. You see the aftermath of a couple of them, but there's really not any gore in this movie, in the general sense. It just kind of tells you, like what you were saying, Gary, how people said you could see the head in the box. Like it's a psychological thing. People thought they saw more than they actually did, I think.
Yeah, I think of that same interview in Playboy that you were talking about with David Fincher. This is where I think this was probably the same interview. It got a quote. He said, the thing I appreciated, he was attributing all this to the quality of Walker's script. He said, the thing I appreciated about it, what I thought Andrew Kevin Walker's script did so well, was that it got your mind in overdrive. It worked on your imagination. We were in great shape and we didn't have to show the head in the box. But yeah, I mean, people constantly say that. Fincher, I think in some interviews said he's gotten in like knockdown, drag out arguments with fans who swear that they have seen the head in the box. Yeah. They made a fake head in the box of Gwyneth Paltrow, it's supposed to be in the box, but it was not used. They did end up using it in the movie Contagion in 2011.
At
an autopsy scene. It was like 16 years later.
Wonder where it is now.
Yeah, and I don't know. It's who knows? Maybe they'll use it when her head needs to be used again.
Yeah, maybe, or maybe what's his name? Chris, her husband, just has it like hanging around the house, like on the mantle somewhere.
Maybe it's like the dude
Coldplay
from Event Horizon who wanted to get his body after the movie. By the way, the delivery man who brings that box at the end of the movie is Richmond Arquette, who is the brother of Roseanne and Patricia
and David
Arquette.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
not the only cameo. Charles S. Dutton is in this, who was in Alien 3. He was the cop who keeps the press out of the greed part of the scene. Yeah.
Do you see his face? You don't see his face, do you?
I don't know if you see his face or not.
I feel like I would have recognized him.
Yeah. Alfonso Freeman, which is Morgan Freeman's son, is the fingerprint technician.
I think I did see that somewhere, yeah.
Yeah. But going back to what your real point was before I talk about bullshit, the weird part about this movie that blows my mind, like especially recently, like where I'm really paying attention to it, is John Doe you never see. I think I read that like, there's only a certain body count. I think it gets to 10 if you count the dog, and but you only ever see one murder on screen.
Yeah,
and it's
John Doe's.
Yeah, killing John Doe. Yeah. And that's it. I mean, everything else is the power of suggestion. It's I don't know. It's it's just weird that he never has to show any on-screen violence in any of it. But when you think about this movie or when you remember it, I feel like you think you saw something.
And I think there's a thing of like the torture, the pain, the evil that you perceive being worse than when or that you don't see. The implied stuff is always much, much worse than what's actually there.
Much worse.
But yeah, it's people. Mm-hmm. People are, the story, the details of the crime scene being told to them in dialogue. They're just like, oh, this movie's full of gore. Like, is it though? No, it's full of words.
It's really not. Yeah, exactly. So in the year since its release, Seven's esteem has grown even more. Like I said, people loved it at the time, but even now it's considered, it is widely considered, I would say, one of the quintessential crime thrillers of the 90s or maybe of all time. And its influence was felt almost immediately with films like The Bone Collector and Along Came a Spider. Both of those came out not too long after, within a few years after this. And even the Saw franchise is heavily influenced by this. It shares a lot of DNA with how the killer is really setting up people to, he's not necessarily killing everyone. The only person John Doe really kills is directly Tracy. Everyone else, he kind of he's putting them into these jigsaw type situations, And if you saw Matt Reeves' 2022 film, The Batman, then you know that Seven's legacy still lives on to this day.
Fincher wishes he had thought of using something in the way on this movie.
Hey, that's a great moment in The Batman, in my opinion.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean, but can you picture it? We could totally take something from Seven or make like a highlight reel and put that song over
that
it,
version,
and it would work really, really well.
Seven is, I think, a minor miracle of a movie, and I love the story behind its creation. I love the idea that the only reason this movie got made, or at least got made in this form by David Fincher, is because someone at New Line goofed and sent him the wrong script. I love that aspect of the story. Because if he had made the one with the revised ending, he probably wouldn't have, or if he had received the one with the revised ending, he probably would not have made it. And if he hadn't stuck his guns about the ending, I'm not sure that we'd still be talking about this film today, at least not as enthusiastically as we have been. Unlike Alien 3, which was compromised from the beginning, Seven is really true to its heart from beginning to end. And as such, it became the true beginning of David Fincher's filmmaking career. This is kind of the perfect melding of filmmaker and script. There's a good chance that if another director had tackled Walker's script, it wouldn't have been this good. But it's one that seems almost tailor-made for Fincher's sensibilities. And thanks to a little bit of luck, like thinking of that quote from Andrew Walker that you mentioned earlier, Gary, about how lucky he was that this ended up in Fincher's hands. Because of that little bit of luck, we now have a stone-cold classic on our hands. And one that is, in my opinion, it's probably Fincher's best work. I think this is Fincher's best movie. And that's saying something in a filmography filled with masterpieces. Seven had a huge impact on the careers of many of those involved. It essentially kicked off Andrew Kevin Walker's career. Brainscan, believe it or not, did not do that, but Seven did. And he would go on to pen films like Joel Schumacher's 8mm, Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow, and Joe Johnston's The Wolfman. And as we mentioned before, he's become a very successful script doctor as well, doing uncredited rewrites on movies like Stir of Echoes and Event Horizon, not to mention Fincher's own The Game and Fight Club. And most recently, he wrote the script for Fincher's The Killer, which came out just a few months ago.
I saw an interview, too, with, I think it was Pitt, who said that Fincher told him and Freeman, no, him and Spacey at Rap, that this is not going to be the movie that you're remembered for, but it might be the movie that you're most proud of.
Turns out both of those things are true. Because this is because I feel like I mean, obviously Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman and David Fincher have all made incredible movies, but when people start thinking about like Brad Pitt movies, this is one of the first ones. It might not be the very first one, but for some people it is. But it is definitely one of the first ones that comes to mind when you think about Brad Pitt, Seven, because it is just that memorable of a movie. And it became a very important stepping stone in his career, just as he'd hoped. It helped him transition to more serious and dramatic roles, including some other Fincher films down the line. And as for Fincher, Seven helped to revitalize his career after the disastrous Alien 3, establishing him as one of the most important filmmakers of his generation. Now, naturally, New Line wanted to repeat Seven's success and proposed a sequel that was idiotically titled 8, and that is spelled EI number 8 HT. This would have been based on a repurposed script called Solace, written by Ted Griffin. The script was about a psychic serial killer who's being pursued by a detective who is also a psychic. And in the repurposed version of this script, the psychic detective would have been Somerset, Morgan Freeman's character. But now Griffin, it's Ted Griffin. He's a talented writer. He wrote Ocean's 11, Matchstick Men, and Ravenous, all films that I enjoy. So the fact that this sounds so stupid isn't really his fault, because he didn't write it as a Seven sequel, you know? The idea of a psychic detective could be pretty cool if you give it to the right director, but the idea of shoehorning Morgan Freeman's character from Seven, a movie with zero supernatural elements in it, is kind of lame. And unsurprisingly, nobody involved in Seven thought this was a good idea. Pitt and Freeman both made it very clear that they had no intention of returning for a sequel, and Fincher, never one to mince words, said, "I would be less interested in that than I would having cigarettes put out in my eyes."
So that's a maybe?
And the script ended up being made into a standalone film in 2015, and it starred Anthony Hopkins, Colin Farrell, and Jeffrey Dean Morgan, but it barely got a release, and I guess there is probably a reason you haven't heard of it.
Yeah, I generally feel that way about movies. If I haven't even heard of it, especially
if it stars Anthony Hopkins and Colin Farrell. If you haven't heard of it and it stars people that you know well, there's a reason for it.
Yeah. Now in 2006, they did Zetascope Entertainment got the license for this and created a 7-part comic series. So they did each of the 7 sins based around this. It was like an anthology, and I think each one was written and drawn by a different creative team, but it was like pages of John Doe's journal, I think, and it was describing the sins.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, but it's not really supposed to, it was like the journal is in the art, but the story that happens isn't necessarily connected, but it is connected. It seems like very loosey-goosey with all of this. But if you're interested in it, I did try to look for it on Amazon.com, and you can get it for about like $400.
Oh, good. Excellent.
and add to cart.
After Seven's success, Fincher was ready to move on to his next feature film. Although not before directing, I have to add the iconic music video for the Wallflowers' 6th Avenue Heartache. That was that was technically his next project. But his next film was one that he'd actually considered directing before Seven, but had been pushed to the sidelines after Brad Pitt became available for Seven. And that film, and the subject of our next episode, is Fincher's what I would consider underrated 1997 film starring Michael Douglas, The Game.
I'm super excited about The Game.
I do want to say about Seven too. It really hit me at the end of this. You know what Seven does really, really well that I don't think we've said is that it's like watching a true crime podcast. It is which is a super popular thing now, true crime, and it is like mostly these guys talking about what this guy did.
Yeah, you're right.
Without showing you the details.
Yeah.
And so like inspiring stuff like, Criminal Minds or something. All these famous police shows that don't show you really the crime, but they're dealing with the after effects and trying to catch the guy and all these true crime things. I don't know. That's interesting to think about, but I feel like Seven kind of did true crime before true crime was like a regular genre of thing. I also didn't get a chance to mention this, and I don't know where I would have put it, so I'll put it here. I thought it was funny in the scene where Somerset gets his friend at the FBI to bring him the library records, and they were like, "Oh, this is illegal. What are you doing?" Blah blah blah. I was like, "That's legal, right?" But not at this time. I did not realize that. But it was the 2001 Patriot Act.
Patriot Act,
Yep.
yeah.
That brought all that in, and now the government just does that. They
don't give a fuck. They were doing it anyway. Now they were doing it anyway. They just made it legal for them to do it.
Yeah.
Well, that's all we got for this episode. Thank you for joining us for this talk about Seven. I hope you enjoyed it. You guys want to let our listeners know where you can be found on the internet?
I am This is Gary Horn on all the social medias. I also work for the National Wrestling Alliance at NWA on all the social medias if you want to get into some wrestling. And you can also find that show on the CW app, which is free to download and free to watch, or it's at CW TV. But it's also available on all your streaming devices, Amazon Fire and Apple TV and Roku and all. You get the idea.
Yeah.
My show, Computer Resume Podcast, is available wherever you get your podcasts. We are covering the entire Star Trek franchise in chronological order. Right now, we are hip deep in our coverage of Strange New Worlds, and we've got some very exciting guests coming very soon. You can find us at Computer Resume on Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, Venmo, and Patreon. And I am at Mr. Todd A. Davis on Facebook, X, Instagram, Letterboxd, and D&D Beyond, as long as they behave themselves.
Well, I'm Justin_Bishop on Instagram and Letterboxd. The show is at Cinema_Shock on Instagram, X, Letterboxd, and all that stuff. Please check out all of our episodes as well as our links to our Discord and our merch. We've got all kinds of t-shirts and all that bullshit at cinemashock.net. As always, like, rate, review, and share this episode with your friends any way you know how. Until next time.
May the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
And be excellent to each other.
Ernest Hemingway once wrote, "The world is a fine place, and Johnny has the keys." I agree with the second one.